Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. I still remember the night I saw that shape in the corner. It was late, maybe a little after midnight, and the apartment felt quieter than usual. I was in my small bedroom, hunched over my old computer browsing random websites. My father was in his room. We shared this cramped place because neither of us could afford our own place at the time. The walls were thin. I could hear him shifting around in his bed, sometimes clearing his throat or coughing. He was getting older, and it was normal for him to go to sleep early. I had my headphones on, half listening to some music not too loud because I didn't want to disturb him. The day had been long, but it was the kind of night where I felt some urge to stay awake. My desk was tucked against one wall and the bed was right behind me. Taking up most of the space, clothes were piled in a corner and the curtains were half closed, letting in a thin slice of moonlight. The glow from the computer monitor lit up my face and the immediate area around me. Everything else was dark. I was about to shut down the computer when I heard something outside my room. It sounded like a person calling my name. It wasn't exactly my father's voice, it was more like a muffled whisper. I remember pausing my music and waiting to hear it again. My heart rate picked up for a second. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Then I heard it again. It was low but clear. I pulled off my headphones and stared at my bedroom door. The apartment was old with peeling paint and dusty corners. The door frame was slightly off balance, so sometimes the door would stick. I got up feeling a chill on my arms and walked over. My fingers felt sweaty against the doorknob. I turned it and opened the door, slowly expecting to see my father standing there or maybe just an empty hallway. The hallway was dim, lit by a cheap overhead bulb that was about to burn out. It flickered sometimes, giving the corridor a shaky glow. I took a step forward, listening for any sign of my father moving around, but I didn't hear him. His door was shut. The living room was to my left, a cramped space with an old couch and a coffee table piled with newspapers. I could smell the stale air. We didn't open the windows much because the street outside was noisy and always smelled like garbage. The walls were a dull beige with stains. I heard a faint rustling sound like fabric moving against the floor. It came from the far corner of the living room, the one closest to the window. The lamp in there was off, so that corner was mostly in shadow. I stepped into the living room, feeling the worn-out carpet under my feet. My eyes struggled to adjust to the darkness. There was a thin streak of light from the street lamp outside, cutting across the floor. It allowed me to see that corner just enough to notice. Something was there, crouched low to the ground. My stomach knotted up. The figure was small, like someone folded in on themselves, arms tucked in, head bent down. I felt my breath hitch in my throat. My first instinct was to flip on the light, but I didn't move. I stood there, frozen, just trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure wore what looked like a dirty old nightgown. It hung loosely around a body that didn't quite look right. The limbs seemed too thin and the fabric looked torn around the edges. The hair, or what I assumed was hair, was so messy that it blended with the darkness. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My heartbeat hammered in my chest, and I could feel my palms getting damp. A part of me wanted to step back and close the door, but I was too shocked to move. I felt a cold sweat trickling down my forehead. The air felt heavy. It was harder to breathe, like the room had been drained of oxygen. My mind raced with questions. Was this an intruder? Was I having some kind of hallucination? Then the figure moved. It didn't stand up, but its head twitched to one side. I heard a faint crack like a joint popping. The movement was quick, almost jerky. My knees felt weak. I tried to call out for my father, but my voice was stuck. I could only manage a choked sound in my throat. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. I blinked, and suddenly the corner was empty. The figure was just gone. No sound, no flash, nothing. One moment it was there, hunched over, and the next it wasn't. I stood there, confused, heart pounding like a drum. My breath came in short gasps. I flipped on the living room light, then my hand almost shaking as I reached for the switch. The lamp buzzed to life, casting a weak yellow light over the old couch and the cluttered coffee table. The corner was empty, the paint on the wall. In that corner was chipped and there was some dust on the floor, but nothing else was out of place. I glanced around, checking behind the couch. I even looked under the table. There was nothing there. The windows were closed, locked from the inside. There was no trace of anyone breaking in. My father's door creaked open. He stepped out, squinting at the light, and asked why I had turned it on. I swallowed hard. Feeling my pulse in my neck, I told him. I thought I saw something, maybe a rat or some weird shadow. He nodded, half asleep, and mumbled that I should go to bed soon. Then he went back to his room and closed the door. I could still hear him clear his throat. He didn't seem worried. He was used to odd noises in the apartment, so he probably assumed it was just another quirk of this rundown building. I stayed in the living room for a long time, staring at that corner, trying to make sense of what happened. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I could feel my heart rate returning to normal, but my mind was still racing. I thought I should check the rest of the apartment, so I walked to the kitchen, turned on the light, and looked around. The sink was full of dishes. The countertop cluttered with old cereal boxes. The small window above the sink was locked. Nothing looked off. I made my way to the bathroom, flipping the switch. The faucet dripped into the stained sink. The door to the shower was slightly open. I peeked inside, heart pounding, but found nothing. When I was sure there was no one else in the apartment, I went back to the living room. I turned off the light, hoping maybe the darkness would give me a better view if something was there. I stood near the hallway, letting my eyes adjust again. My pulse sped up as I imagined the figure reappearing. A shiver ran through me and I felt goosebumps along my arms, but the corner stayed empty. The air still felt a bit heavy, though I breathed in and out, trying to calm myself. Eventually, I told myself if I was tired and just seeing things, I walked back to my room and closed the door behind me. Once inside, I couldn't concentrate on anything else. My computer was still on the screen showing some random website, but I couldn't focus. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. My mind kept replaying that image. The figure crouched in the corner, head down, arms pulled in. Wearing that old gown, it was so real my body still felt tense, like I was bracking for something bad to happen. I decided to try and distract myself, so I opened a streaming site on my computer and put on some random show. I kept the volume low every few seconds. I paused it and listened for any sound in the apartment, but there was nothing, just the faint hum of the fridge and an occasional cough from my father's room. After about an hour of trying to watch that show, I gave up. I was too wound up. I turned off the computer and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The darkness felt thicker than usual, and every small creak made my heart skip a beat. The next morning, I woke up later than usual, feeling groggy. My father was in the kitchen making coffee. He glanced at me and asked if I slept well. I shrugged, not sure what to say. He seemed normal, dressed in his usual shirt and pants. Reading the newspaper at the table, I poured myself a cup of coffee. Still feeling shaky, I kept thinking about telling him what I really saw, but I didn't want him to worry. Besides, I wasn't even sure if it was real. I walked to the living room and stood in front of that corner in the daylight. It looked grimy, the paint peeling in strips. There was a musty smell near the window. I leaned in closer, checking the floor for footprints or any sign that something had been there. I found nothing, just dust and some old stains still. I felt a subtle tension in my chest when I looked at that spot. It felt like there was something lingering. Even though I couldn't see anything over the next few days, I tried to go about my routine. I went to work, came home, ate dinner with my father, and spent my evenings on my computer. But every time I passed the living room, I'd sense a tightness in my stomach. I started turning on the lights more, even during the day, just to feel safer. My father teased me about the electricity bill, but I didn't care. The memory of that night wouldn't leave me alone. Once in a while, when I was alone in the apartment, I thought I heard small noises coming from the living room. It could have been the old pipes, or it could have been my imagination, but I always paused. Listening closely, my body would tense up my ears, straining to catch any hint of movement. Then I'd shake it off, force myself to move on, but a layer of anxiety stuck with me. I couldn't relax like I used to. I kept thinking that maybe I should talk to someone about it, but I didn't have many close friends and I didn't feel comfortable describing what I saw to acquaintances at work. I tried looking up stories online, reading about shadows or strange apparitions, but most stuff I found sounded too far-fetched or filled with bizarre details that didn't match what I experienced. I ended up closing those tabs, feeling unsettled at night. My room became my refuge, but also the place where my mind raced with thoughts. I locked my door. Sometimes, though I wasn't even sure what I was afraid of, I knew it wouldn't help if that thing ever decided to appear again. But locking the door felt like a small layer of control. The nights passed slowly. I could hear the traffic outside, people yelling or laughing on the street. I'd lie awake watching the light from passing cars move across the walls. Every now and then I'd drift off and dream about the corners, seeing that shape again, feeling the same rush of terror. I'd wake up sweating, my heart racing. Every morning I'd step into the living room, quickly glance at the corner and remind myself it was just an empty space. But deep down I knew something had happened that night. I didn't understand it and I wasn't sure if I'd ever see it again. My father never mentioned anything strange, so I assumed he hadn't seen anything that made me feel alone in this experience. One evening, about a week later, I decided to stay up late again. My father was already asleep. I turned off most of the lights, leaving only a small lamp in my bedroom. I opened my door just enough so I could see into the hallway. I wanted to test myself. Part of me was terrified, but another part of me needed to know if this was real or just a momentary hallucination. Midnight came. I could hear the pipes rattling a bit like they always did in this old building. I stared at the hallway. The living room light was off, so that corner was dark. After a while, my back started to hurt from sitting at my desk, so I stood up and leaned on the door frame. I listened closely for any sound. My heart pounded and I felt a knot in my stomach. The hallway looked the same as always, but my nerves were on edge. I stayed there for maybe an hour, checking my phone occasionally, but mostly just watching the tension built up in my neck and shoulders. Finally, I decided I couldn't do this anymore. I quietly closed my door and went to bed. Nothing showed up that night, or if it did, I didn't see it still. Every day, whenever I enter the living room, I can't shake the memory of that figure. My chest tightens for a second, and I scan that corner. Nothing is ever there, but the memory lingers as fresh as the night it happened. I keep wondering if maybe one day I'll walk in and see it crouched there again. So that's my story. I don't have an explanation for what I saw. I'm not sure if it was a ghost, a strange intruder, or some trick my mind played on me. All I know is that I felt real fear that night, and it left me with a lasting sense of unease. The apartment itself is still the same cramped, slightly depressing place, and my father and I still go about our days like before, but now whenever I step into the living room, I feel that heaviness in the air. Sometimes it's just a faint tingle in my spine, sometimes a clenching in my gut, and I can't ignore the idea that it might happen again. I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts, but this house made me question everything I thought I knew about strange occurrences. It wasn't dramatic. At first, it didn't come with flickering lights or loud wails in the night. It started with small things, missing tools, odd noises, and a feeling I couldn't shake. By the time I realized what was happening, I had already sunk a lot of money into the place. I didn't want to walk away. I wanted answers now. Years later, every time I dream about that house, I feel the same chill crawling up my spine. Let me tell you exactly what happened. I bought this huge place on the outskirts of the city. I was excited because it was much cheaper than I ever expected. For a house that size, I thought I got lucky. It was old, clearly built several decades ago, with walls and rooms that looked like they had been remodeled and repurposed at different points in history. The yard was overgrown and the paint was peeling off in patches. My family teased me, saying the house looked haunted. I just laughed. I figured it was my chance to fix up a big property without breaking my budget on the first day of renovations. I brought in a few workers I'd hired. We started ripping out old cabinets in the kitchen while we were busy. I realized I couldn't find my measuring tape. I asked the workers if they'd taken it, but nobody had. We checked the counters, inside boxes, even under some piles of debris. Nothing. Eventually, I gave up and used a different measuring tape. I told myself I was just disorganized, but the same thing happened again the next day. This time it was my hammer. I'd set it down on the living room floor when I heard someone calling me from the other side of the house. When I got back, the hammer was gone. I only found it a few hours later on a windowsill in one of the upstairs bedrooms. I remembered feeling confused because I hadn't even been in that room that day. Still, I brushed it off as a silly mistake, maybe by one of the workers or by me. I didn't think much more about it. The weeks passed and small items continued to vanish. Sometimes they reappeared in odd places, sometimes they didn't show up at. All the guys who worked with me started making jokes about poltergeists. I told them to focus on the job, though I admit I felt uneasy. When I walked through certain hallways, I noticed a sudden drop in temperature. The house had no centralized heating or cooling yet, but this was different. One step the room would feel normal, and the next step it felt like stepping inside a freezer. My arms would get goosebumps, my breath wouldn't turn into fog or anything. But the chill felt real. It didn't happen everywhere, just specific corridors and certain rooms that were mostly empty. At first I thought there could be some weird draft in the house. The building was old. Maybe the insulation was poor. But then I also started feeling like someone was right behind me. Whenever I stood in those cold spots, I'd look over my shoulder and see nothing still. That feeling of being watched made my stomach tighten. I tried to stay logical. Maybe the house had cracks or hidden openings. Maybe air was flowing. Strangely, I kept telling myself it was just an old building with quirks. I noticed something else. The workers began complaining about being watched too. They didn't say it straight to my face, but they'd whisper among themselves saying they felt uneasy. One guy told me he heard a faint knocking behind the walls when he was working upstairs. Another said he found footprints on a dusty floor even though he just cleaned that area and hadn't gone back in. I still insisted it must be animals, maybe rats or something else scuttling around. It wasn't a nice thought, but it felt more reasonable than the alternative about a month into renovations. I moved in. I figured it was cheaper to just camp out in one of the finished rooms. My family stayed at our old apartment in the city, but I wanted to keep an eye on the project. I wanted to make sure I could troubleshoot problems right away. Sleeping in that house felt odd. It was quiet, especially at night. But sometimes I heard soft thuds from upstairs as if someone was dropping a book on the floor. I'd go check, flashlight in hand, and find nothing. Nothing. The floors would be empty, the walls silent. I'd poke around tapping on walls to see if there were any hidden compartments or areas I hadn't noticed, but no luck. One night around midnight, I was sitting at the kitchen table going through some documents related to plumbing and electrical work. I heard slow, heavy footsteps above me. The ceiling creaked step by step, moving from one corner of the upstairs hallway to the other. My heart started pounding. I wanted to think it was just the old house settling, but it sounded exactly like a person walking. I grabbed a flashlight and ran upstairs. The hallway was empty. No one was there. As I stood there, the footsteps started again, almost right beside me, but I couldn't see a thing. I felt my chest tighten and my legs got shaky. I checked each room, flipped every light switch I could find, opened every closet. Nothing, but I still felt that sensation of being watched. A few days later, I invited my brother to come check out the progress on the renovations. He showed up in the afternoon. We walked around together, looking at the rooms, discussing paint colors. At one point, we both heard a crash from downstairs. We ran down and found a pile of tools scattered on the floor. They looked like they'd been knocked off a table. We tried to see if maybe the table was unsteady or if someone had bumped into it. The table was solid, and we were the only ones in the house at the time. My brother shrugged it off, but I saw the tension on his face. The longer I stayed in that house, the more I noticed small, eerie things happening. Sometimes I'd find doors open that I swore I had closed. Windows would slam shut on windless days. I'd go into the bathroom and feel something brush against my arm. Even though no one was there at night, I started hearing faint tapping noises on the walls, always at irregular intervals. I checked for pipes or old wiring that could cause it, but I never found a clear explanation. One evening, I sat in the kitchen again with a cup of coffee. I was staring at the floor, thinking about how much work was left on the house. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a pillow fly across the living room and slam into the wall. I jumped up so fast that I knocked over my coffee cup. It was one of the old couch pillows I had stacked in a corner. I had placed them there to keep them out of the way. They were all neatly piled. Now one of them had traveled a good 6 or 7 feet and hit the wall with a thud. I stood there, heart pounding. Staring at the pillow on the floor, I tried to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe that I had stacked them poorly or that I had somehow knocked one with my foot. But I was in the kitchen. There was no reason for a pillow to move like that on its own. After that incident, I started keeping a little bottle of holy water around. I'm not super religious, but I remember my grandmother always kept a small bottle in her cabinet, so I went out and got one. From a nearby church, I sprinkled it around the hallways and in the corners of the rooms that felt especially cold. I didn't really believe it would solve anything, but I felt better. Trying something, oddly enough, the activity seemed to stop for a few weeks. The house was quieter. Tools stayed where I left them. Doors didn't open by themselves. The cold spots were still there, but they felt less severe. I began thinking maybe the place just needed a little blessing or something along those lines. Those quiet weeks didn't last forever on a rainy night. I woke up to the sound of scraping along the floor in the hallway. I stayed in my makeshift bedroom listening, afraid to open the door. The scraping went on for about a minute. Then I heard a dull thud against my door. My mouth went dry. I reached for the baseball bat I kept by the bed. I waited. Not making a sound, I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I counted the seconds, 10, 20, 30. Nothing else happened. I opened the door a crack and looked outside. The hallway light was on. I saw a chair from the dining room standing in the middle of the hall. I had left that chair in the dining room downstairs when I'd finished dinner earlier. Now it was upstairs and right outside my door. I don't remember carrying it there. I didn't hear anyone carrying it, but there it was. I decided to place the chair back downstairs as if that would restore some sense of normalcy. I lugged it down step by step, feeling every hair on my neck stand up. I felt like something was lurking nearby, watching me struggle with the chair. When I got back to my room, I locked the door. I barely slept the rest of the night. The next day, I called my family and told them about some of the weird stuff going on. I tried to act casual, but I couldn't hide how shaken I felt. They told me to take a break, maybe stay somewhere else for a while, but I was stubborn. I wanted to see the project through. I'd put a lot of money and time into this house. I hoped it was just stress or my imagination getting the better of me. But I kept having disturbing experiences. One afternoon, I was repainting a hallway when I heard my name whispered behind me. It was a rough, breathy whisper, like someone was speaking from a dry throat. I spun around, paint roller in hand. The hallway was empty. I felt my stomach flip, and I actually shouted, "Who's there?" My voice echoed off the old walls. No response. I checked every room, feeling sweat drip down my back. After that, I started keeping music on my phone as loud as I could, just to drown out any noises I didn't want to hear. Sometimes I felt stupid for being afraid. Other times I felt like I had a right to be scared because these events were happening. More often, doors would rattle in the middle of the night. I'd hear footsteps pacing back and forth in the upstairs hallway. My tools would end up in strange places, like stuff behind the water heater or placed inside an empty closet. I got used to the possibility that when I set something down, I might have to search an entire floor to find it again. Months passed and the major renovations were finally done. I moved the rest of my belongings into the house and tried to make it feel like a home. Still, whenever I walked through certain corridors, I felt that chill. Sometimes I felt as if something was inches away from my shoulder, matching my stride. My family visited, but they never stayed overnight. They felt uneasy too. They'd laugh it off during the day, but when dusk fell, they'd make excuses to leave. I never saw any figure or shape. I only heard noises and felt chills. The scariest moments were the nights when the footsteps sounded like they were right outside my bedroom door. I didn't want to open the door and look because I knew I'd see nothing yet. The tension felt crushing, like someone was standing there evaluating me, waiting for me to do something over time. I learned to coexist with the strange energy in the house I kept. That bottle of holy water nearby, just in case some days were normal with no incidents at all. Other days I'd walk into a room and find a drawer pulled out or a piece of furniture slightly moved, like someone had shoved it from behind. I never found a clear explanation. I checked the house's history. I found no major tragedies or anything that stood out. It was just an old building that had seen a lot of residents over the decades. Eventually, I decided to move on. I stayed in that house for a few years, but I never felt completely at ease. My family was always on edge when they visited. I sold the property. The sale price wasn't great, but I figured it was time to cut my losses. The new owner didn't ask many questions, and I didn't volunteer details about the odd happenings. Now, when I look back, I wish I could say I solved the mystery, but I have no conclusion. Sometimes I still dream about the place. In those dreams, I'm walking through the cold hallways. I can hear the floor creaking behind me, and I feel that stare burning into the back of my head. I always wake up with a knot in my stomach, my shirt damp with sweat. Even though I'm gone from that house, the memory hasn't let me go. That's all I can say. There was something there, something that didn't want me around. Or maybe something trying to get my attention, I don't know. All I do know is that if you ask me about real-life hauntings, I won't laugh anymore. I lived with it, and I'll never forget that feeling of cold, watchful eyes on me in my own home. I moved into that old Victorian house on a rainy afternoon. The real estate agent kept smiling, but I noticed she skipped any mention of the attic. She highlighted the renovated kitchen, the spacious dining room, and the decent plumbing. She told me about the age of the place, late 1800s. Lots of original fixtures. She never once said a word about the top floor. I thought that was odd, but I didn't ask. I was eager to settle in, and I figured it was just another empty space with a few cobwebs. That assumption turned out to be wrong. During my first week there, I was mostly dealing with boxes, cables, and furniture placement. I had no reason to go poking around in the attic. The entrance was a narrow staircase near the end of the upstairs hallway. A thin door separated that staircase from the rest of the house. It looked plain, but the knob squeaked whenever I touched it. I only gled inside once or twice. I remember stepping in one afternoon just to get a sense of the space. The ceiling was low. The beams were exposed, and there was a weak light bulb dangling from a frayed cord. The room smelled stale like dust and old newspapers. I didn't see anything valuable or interesting. There was another door in the corner, thicker with a deadbolt on my side. It was locked, and I didn't have the key. I figured it was just a storage area I'd explore. Eventually, I shut the attic door, returned to my regular tasks, and forgot about it. The first few days in the house were quiet. The floors creaked at night, and the wind rattled the old windows, but nothing stood out. I got my bedroom organized and set up my living room with a comfortable couch and a small TV. I felt settled. I even started sleeping better after the stress of moving, but on the 10th or 11th evening, something changed. I was downstairs in the living room, flipping through some channels. The house was dim, and the only lights on were the ones near the front entrance around 10 p.m. I heard something above me. It sounded like a chair being pushed across the floor. The scrape was slow and deliberate. At first, I froze. I thought maybe it was the wind shaking a loose board. Then I heard it again. Louder this time, it was definitely the sound of furniture legs dragging across wood. My heart thudded in my chest. I turned off the TV and listened hard. It happened once more, then stopped. I told myself the house was old and made weird noises. I tried to relax, but I ended up pacing back and forth, staring at the ceiling. The sound didn't come back after 20 minutes of silence. I went to bed feeling tense the next day. I couldn't stop thinking about that noise. I went up to the attic around noon, telling myself I was just being thorough. I climbed the narrow steps slowly. The space looked the same as before. Dusty, stale, and cramped. I walked around checking the corners. There were a few old boxes, some broken picture frames, and a small table missing one leg. Nothing looked moved or rearranged. I tested the table by dragging it an inch. It made a sharp scrape that echoed through the attic. It sounded almost exactly like what I'd heard the night before. That made me uneasy. I looked at the door in the corner. It was still locked. I rattled the knob a bit solid. I didn't hear any rustling or movement behind it. After a quick scan, I headed back downstairs. I told myself it had been a random noise. Nothing more that evening. I tried to distract myself with a movie around 9:30 p.m. I went into the kitchen to grab a drink. The house felt colder than usual as I reached for the light switch. I heard that same scraping sound. It was softer this time, like something was just nudging across the floor. My scalp prickled. I put down my glass and walked to the bottom of the attic stairs. The door at the foot of the staircase was shut, but I could see a faint glow around the edges. That single light bulb in the attic was on, even though I was certain I'd turned it off. My chest felt tight. I took a breath, opened the door, and climbed a few steps. The scraping stopped the moment I set foot on the first step. My palms were clammy on the handrail when I reached the top. The dangling bulb flickered. It gave off a weak yellow light. My eyes scanned the space. The boxes were in the same place. The table looked undisturbed. I paused and listened. No sounds, no movement. I noticed the dust hanging in the air. Drifting through the light, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Then my eyes landed on the locked door in the corner. The doorknob was slightly turned. It was at an angle like someone on the other side had just twisted it. I stared at it, trying to process what I was seeing. Suddenly, the knob jerked. It turned all the way, rattled, and stopped. A surge of adrenaline went through me. I took a step back. My calves hit a stack of boxes, and I almost lost my balance. My breathing was shallow. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask if anyone was in there. I stood there, heart pounding. The knob slowly turned back to its original position and went still. My throat felt dry, and I could barely swallow after a few seconds of silence. I backed up toward the stairs. My steps were shaky, and each tread creaked under my weight. I didn't hear anything else. No voice, no footstep. I hurried out, closed the attic door behind me, and locked it. With the small latch on the outside, I stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to calm down. My head buzzed with questions I couldn't answer. Did someone break in? Was there a hidden entrance? Maybe the space behind that door led to an old crawl space or a second staircase. I thought about calling the police, but I felt stupid. There was no evidence of a break-in. None of the windows were shattered, and the attic door looked untouched aside from some scratches on the frame that might have been there for years. I told myself I'd check it in the morning when the sunlight would make me feel braver that night. I locked my bedroom door. I jumped at every little creak. I barely slept the few times I drifted off. I jerked awake at the slightest noise around 3 a.m. I heard faint tapping from above. It wasn't as loud as before, more like someone was pacing. I listened, heart thawing, until it stopped by the time the sun came up. I felt exhausted in the morning. I forced myself back upstairs. I wanted to see if I had missed some detail that explained all this. I brought a flashlight and a hammer just in case I needed to pry something open. The attic was bright with the morning light coming through a small window on the north wall. I walked to the locked door. I noticed fresh scratches around the knob. They were small gouges, like someone had tried to force the lock from the inside. I knelt down and pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing I considered breaking the lock, but something about that thought made my stomach tighten. I wasn't sure I wanted to see what was in there. The rational side of me kept saying there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe an animal had gotten stuck. Maybe a stray cat had found its way in, but I'd never heard a cat twist a doorknob before. I decided to add another layer of security. I found a padlock in one of my toolboxes. I drilled a small bracket into the outside frame and attached the padlock. Now the door had 2 locks from my side. I felt safer after doing that. I told myself that if it was an animal, it couldn't get past both locks. I poked around the rest of the attic. I found nothing but dust and a few scattered magazines from decades ago. I went back downstairs and tried to move on with my day. Over the next week, I started avoiding the attic. I didn't hear noises every single night, but every few days something would happen. A scraping sound, a soft thud, or a faint shuffle. It was enough to keep my nerves on edge. My hands would shake. Whenever I opened the attic door to take a quick peek, each time I found the light cord swaying slightly as though someone had tugged on it. Each time the locked door in the corner looked undisturbed from the outside, but sometimes I saw new scratches around the frame. Other times I found bits of wood on the floor as if something was clawing at the door from inside. My sleep got worse. I started jolting awake in the early hours. I would reach over for my phone and stare at it, wondering if I should call someone. But what would I say? One evening I was in the kitchen washing a plate. It was around 7:00 p.m. and the sun had set. The house was quiet. I heard a sudden thump from above, so strong it rattled the light fixture in the kitchen. I dropped the plate into the sink. My heart pounded. I stared at the ceiling. Then for the first time I heard footsteps moving across the attic. They were slow, steady footsteps like boots on hardwood. I put my hand over my mouth to keep quiet. The footsteps stopped near the top of the attic stairs that was right above me. My mind raced. I wanted to leave the house. I grabbed my keys and walked to the front door. But then the footsteps resumed, moving back to toward the corner of the attic. I heard the distinct click of the locked door's knob. I stood there, gripping my keys, trying to decide if I should drive away or go upstairs. I gathered enough courage to climb the stairs one more time. I opened the attic door carefully. The single bulb was on flickering. I could see my breath in the cold air. Everything looked normal on the surface, the boxes, the table, the old magazines. But now I heard a soft rustling behind that locked door. It sounded like hands scraping along the inside panel. I swallowed hard, took another step forward and spoke in a low voice. "Who's there?" No reply. I asked again. A bit louder, nothing. Then the doorknob jerked with force. I watched it twist left and right. Something was trying to open it. My heart hammered. I took 2 steps back, turned around and rushed down the stairs. My shoulders felt stiff and my stomach was in knots from that point on. I couldn't deny there was something in there. I didn't know if it was a person or something else. I decided to lock the attic door from the hallway side as well. So now there was a latch on the outside attic entrance and 2 locks on the door in the corner upstairs. It felt like overkill, but I didn't care. I couldn't sleep unless I knew everything was secure. My plan was to stay in the house until I could find a new place. I wasn't going to explore further. I just wanted to get through my lease without going insane. I avoided the attic after that. I ignored the noises as best I could. Some nights were quiet, which let me sleep a few hours. Other nights I heard muffled tapping or dragging sounds, once around 2 a.m. I thought I heard a faint cough, but I convinced myself I imagined it. I kept my distance. I paid my bills, worked my job, and tried to live a normal life. But every time I passed that hallway door, I felt a knot in my stomach. The idea of going up there again made my legs feel weak. I'd find any reason to avoid it. Once or twice friends came over. I never mentioned the act to them. I felt embarrassed. I could have asked them to help me investigate, but I didn't want to drag them into it. I also didn't want to explain why I was so freaked out about some old door, so I pretended everything was fine. We hung out downstairs, or in the backyard. I always kept the hallway door locked and told people I just hadn't gotten around to cleaning the attic. After a few months, I reached the point where I knew I had to move out. The tension was eating me alive. I'd jump at the sound of my own fridge cycling. My hands shook whenever I turned a doorknob. I started having nightmares about locked doors, so I found a cheaper place across town. It wasn't as nice, but I didn't care. I arranged the move quickly on moving day. I avoided the attic completely. I hired a couple of guys to handle my heavier furniture. I didn't even bring up the attic with them. I let them haul everything from the bedrooms and living room. I grabbed my last few boxes from downstairs. I was done by late afternoon. I stood in the empty living room, double-checking that I wasn't forgetting anything. The house felt silent, but also charged. Like the moment before a storm, the hallway door that led to the attic was still locked. I found myself staring at it, remembering the sounds of footsteps and the twisting doorknob. I felt a wave of relief knowing I was leaving. I stepped outside, locked the front door, and drove away. I never looked back. I haven't been inside that attic since I stayed in that house for only a few months in total, but it felt longer. Sometimes I still think about that locked door. I wonder if it ever opened. Part of me hopes that whoever lives there now never bothers to check. Another part of me can't help imagining the doorknob rattling in the dark, waiting for someone to turn it from the outside, and that's all I know. I never found out what was behind it, and I'm not sure I really want to know. My only advice is this: if you ever move into a place with an unused attic, make sure you really want to see what's up there before you open any locked doors, because once you do, it's hard to forget. I never expected that moving into my grandparents' old house would tear my family apart. We had always gotten along, my parents. My sister and I used to share everything. We ate dinner together, watched TV in the same room, and helped each other with small chores around the house. We bickered sometimes, but it never escalated. All that changed the day we packed up our belongings and moved into that creaky house my grandparents left us. That place seemed normal at first. It had wooden floors, tall windows, and a large living room, but the feeling inside was heavy. The air felt thick from the day we arrived. I remember walking into the foyer with a box of plates. My arms hurt from carrying it. My sister was behind me with a few blankets. She complained about the dust in the corners. My mom was trying to open, stuck windows, and my dad was messing with lamp that kept buzzing when he turned it on. At first, I chalked everything up to the house being old and neglected. There was a musty smell near the closet and some floorboards squeaked loudly. None of that alarmed me. Old houses have quirks. I sat down my box and wiped the sweat from my forehead. My shirt felt damp. The sun was bright outside, but inside the light seemed dim and almost grayish. I shook off the discomfort, thinking it was just my imagination. During the first week we tried to settle in, my father spent hours cleaning the gutters. My mother scrubbed the bathroom tiles and vacuumed the rugs left behind by my grandparents. I painted a few walls in the hall, and my sister reorganized the kitchen cabinets. We were tired but determined to make the house comfortable, yet the tension started building fast. We began snapping at each other over stupid things. One day my mother was furious at me because I left a wet towel on the bathroom floor. Another day, my father yelled at my sister for walking too loudly in the upstairs hallway. I found myself annoyed by my dad's habit of whistling in the mornings. I had never cared about that before the arguments got worse. It wasn't just minor irritations. Sometimes we screamed at each other, our voices echoed down the hall, and nobody seemed to calm down after each fight. We would retreat to our rooms in silence. There was a strange heaviness in my chest whenever we quarreled. It felt like a tightness that lingered for hours. I started avoiding common areas because I didn't want to get dragged into more conflict. My sister did the same. My parents tried to keep some sense of normalcy by suggesting we watch a movie together. But 5 minutes in, my mother would find a reason to leave the room, or my father would complain about the volume. Then they would start bickering. I would stand up and go to my bedroom, frustrated and confused. Around the second week, I began hearing faint voices. It happened in quiet moments. Usually when I was alone in the living room or the kitchen. At first, I thought it was just the old pipes or maybe the wind outside, but there was no wind. I'd be washing dishes and I'd hear what sounded like someone saying my name in the next room. The voice was low and drawn out when I dried my hands and went to check. I found nobody there. My parents might be upstairs or my sister might be taking out the trash. But that voice sounded so close sometimes it sounded like more than one person mumbling. I couldn't catch specific words. It was like a low hum that rose and fell without forming clear sentences. These incidents made me jumpy. My heart rate would spike and I would freeze in place for a few seconds. Then I would try to dismiss it. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. I was already stressed because of the constant arguments, but I couldn't deny the cold feeling that spread through my body. Each time I heard those voices, my arms would get goosebumps and my mouth would go dry. I tried telling my sister about it. She gave me a blank stare and said she occasionally heard weird creaks at night, but she hadn't heard voices. She told me to rest more and stop overthinking. Then the chandelier in the dining room started acting up. It was a big chandelier with old-style bulbs. Sometimes when I glanced at it from the corner of my eye, I would see it flicker. But whenever I looked straight at it, the flicker stopped. I thought the wires were faulty, so I tried changing the bulbs. Nothing changed. I tested the switch. It worked fine. Yet in my peripheral vision, the light would dim for a split second and then brighten again. My dad said he noticed the same thing once or twice, but he blamed it on the wiring in the house. I wasn't so sure. By the third week, we had another strange problem. Doors around the house kept slamming at odd times. Sometimes it would be the bathroom door, other times the door to the guest bedroom would shut on its own. There was no strong draft. The windows were closed. The corridors weren't windy. These doors would slam with force. making a sharp crack that echoed through the walls. Each time it happened, I felt a jolt in my stomach. My heart would pound and I would stand there staring at the door. I tried explaining it. Logically, houses settle, wood expands, contracts with temperature changes, but I never felt a breeze or saw any reason for the door to move. That violently, the strangest part was how these events seemed tied to our moods. If we were in a foul mood, the house felt darker and the slamming happened more often when one of us yelled. I swore I heard faint footsteps in the hallway a few times. I rushed to the hallway to see if someone was there. I found nothing. My mother started complaining about headaches and my father looked worn out. They snapped at each other for the smallest issues. My sister refused to stay in the living room alone. She said she felt watched one afternoon. I was searching for my car keys. I could have sworn I left them on the coffee table in the living room. I remember placing them there because I needed to drive to the hardware store when I walked into the living room. The keys were gone. I checked the couches, the shelves, and the floor. I got frustrated and shouted for my parents. Nobody answered. I spent 20 minutes turning that room upside down. I found the keys later in the hallway on the floor near the front door. I had no memory of dropping them there. It made no sense. I felt a chill in my neck, and my shoulders stiffened. My gut told me something was off at night. The tension became worse. My dad snored loudly, and my mom would nudge him, cursing under her breath. My sister had trouble sleeping. She stayed up late pacing in her room. I heard her footsteps. Back and forth, hour after hour, I couldn't rest either. I heard soft creaks from the staircase at random intervals. I got up and checked a couple of times. I found nothing, but each time I stood there feeling a heavy weight in my chest. My heartbeat seemed so loud in my own ears. One evening, after a heated argument with my father about the misplaced toolbox, I went downstairs to the kitchen for water. My throat felt dry and tight. I noticed a whispering sound near the kitchen window. It was close to the sink. I froze in front of the sink, my hand gripping the faucet handle. The whispering was steady, like two people talking under their breath. I heard a faint hiss. My scalp tingled and my eyes started tearing up. Not from sadness, but from raw tension. My breathing became shallow. I wanted to move away from that spot, but my legs felt heavy. I forced myself to turn around and flick on the overhead light. The sound stopped abruptly. I just stood there, my hand shaking as I held the glass of water. I downed the water in one gulp and went straight to my bedroom without a word. My mom tried to ignore everything. She was in denial about the voices and the slamming doors, but even she started showing signs of anxiety. She lost weight. She ate less. My father acted gruff and impatient. He yelled at small inconveniences. He banged his F on the table. If dinner was late, my sister was on edge, snapping at me. If I asked a simple question, I felt it too. I caught myself glaring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, my shoulders tense, my fists clenched. The mirror was old with some spots of discoloration, and I hated looking at my own face in it. I didn't like who I was becoming. One afternoon, I decided to check the attic my grandparents used to store random stuff up there, but I hadn't been inside since we moved in. I climbed the narrow staircase and felt the air become stale and hot. My shirt stuck to my back. The attic was dimly lit by a small window on the far side. I saw old trunks boxes and furniture covered in dusty sheets. Each step I took made the wooden boards gran. I tried to find anything that might explain the strange noises or flickering lights. Maybe there was a wiring panel up there or some rodents messing with the insulation. I poked around carefully, lifting sheets and opening boxes. I found nothing unusual except for a few family mementos, old photo albums, out-of clothes, and some letters my grandparents kept. I felt a twinge of guilt reading the letters without permission, so I put them back. The smell of stale air made me cough. I noticed an odd silence in the attic, as if everything outside had vanished. No wind, no voices, no footsteps. I felt calmer up there, but also uneasy. My heart beat faster. The longer I stayed, I couldn't see any reason for the events happening downstairs. I left the attic feeling frustrated as the weeks passed. The house affected me more and more. I started having trouble focusing on work. I felt exhausted even after a full night's sleep. My muscles felt stiff. Sometimes I woke up sweating, heart pounding. I dreamed about hearing those whispers right against my ear in the dream. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Then I would wake up in a panic. My mouth felt dry and my pillow was damp from sweat. My sister complained about similar nightmares. She said she dreamt about doors slamming over and over. My mom avoided talking about any dreams, but I noticed her hands shaking when she poured coffee in the morning. We were all on edge one night. My father lost his temper when the hallway light went out. He stomped around the living room muttering curses. I tried to talk to him, but he ignored me. My sister brushed past me with an annoyed look. I felt heat rising in my face. My father and sister started yelling at each other over some missing remote control. I didn't care about the remote. I just wanted some peace. My chest felt tight. My arms trembled with anger I couldn't place. I wanted to punch a wall or break something. My mother stood by the stairs watching us. Her eyes were wide and she looked small in her nightgown. She said nothing. I left the living room and went outside, slamming the front door behind me. Outside, the air felt crisp and cool. I stood on the porch trying to calm down. My heart pounded in my ears. I looked through the window into the living room. The chandelier light flickered again. I saw it go dark for a moment. Then Brighton, my sister, and father were still arguing. My head ached and I inhaled deeply for a second. I wondered if the house was doing this to us. I never believed in haunted houses or curses, but everything felt wrong. It wasn't just the arguments, it was the constant sense of someone watching me, the cold spots. The whispers that seemed to appear in empty rooms in the final week before we left. I felt a growing sense of dread. Whenever I stepped inside, the hallway smelled stale and the floors creaked more than usual. One evening I heard a loud bang upstairs. I dashed up expecting to see something fallen or broken. My bedroom door was closed. I opened it and the mirror on the dresser was tilted. It looked like it had been pushed forward. My books were on the floor. Nobody else was upstairs at the time. My arm shook as I picked the books up. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer when we finally decided to move out. I felt relief and anger at the same time. We packed in a hurry, shoving our things into boxes. We barely spoke to each other. My father refused to talk about anything. Supernatural, he just wanted to leave. My mother cried at random intervals, but she never explained why my sister stayed silent carrying boxes out to the car. I kept my thoughts to myself. My heart still pounded at every small noise on the last day as I walked through each room to check if we forgot anything. I felt this heavy weight in my gut. The house seemed darker, even though the sun was shining outside. The silence inside felt suffocating. I half expected to hear that whispering again, but there was nothing, just the creaking floorboards under my feet. We drove away, each of us lost in our own thoughts. None of us looked back even now. Whenever I think about that old house, I feel a rush of anger and sadness. My shoulders tense up. My jaw clenches. I get a dull ache in my temples. It's like that place drained every bit of warmth from us. We haven't visited it again. My parents talk about selling it. My sister refuses to discuss it. Sometimes I recall the faint voices I heard in the kitchen. I can still feel that cold spot on the back of my neck. I can still see the chandelier flickering out of the corner of my eye. Those memories make my stomach tighten. I don't know if there was a logical explanation. I only know how it felt to live there and how my family changed in those weeks. That house brought out the worst in us, and I'm grateful I don't have to set foot in it again. I found the apartment on a Monday afternoon. I was scrolling through listings. Not expecting much, most places looked run down or way too expensive. Then I saw this ground floor apartment in an old mansion. The ad said it was newly renovated with decent rent, and in a quiet neighborhood it seemed like a good deal. I drove over to check it out the next day. The building was older than I expected, but the outside looked solid. The landlord greeted me at the front door and walked me through the long hallway. We reached the apartment, which took up the entire left side of the ground floor. The rooms were big and the floors were made of old polished wood. The ceilings were high despite being old. The place felt sturdy. The landlord told me the upstairs units were vacant, but he planned to rent them out soon. I liked the vibe. It didn't feel creepy at first. It felt like I was stepping into something classic. I signed the lease and moved in a week later for the first month. Everything was good. I hear normal house sounds at night. Pipes rattling a bit. Maybe the wind outside the windows were large, so I got plenty of light during the day. At night, it was quiet. I worked at a small design firm, so I usually came back after 600, made dinner, and relaxed in front of the TV. I had an armchair in the living room and a table in the kitchen. The place wasn't too cluttered. It just felt comfortable. The old architecture gave it a bit of charm, but I didn't pay much attention to that. I was busy with work and settling in. Then one night, around the start of the second month, I was about to fall asleep and heard footsteps upstairs. They were heavy enough that I could imagine someone walking from one side of the room to the other. At first, I thought the landlord rented it out, but he hadn't mentioned anything. The next morning, I texted him to ask if anyone had moved in. He said no. The upstairs floor was still empty. I figured maybe he was mistaken, or maybe someone was inspecting the place. I let it go and moved on, but a few nights later, the footsteps came back. They started after midnight. They didn't sound like normal creaks. They sounded like someone pacing. There were also noises that reminded me of furniture being dragged. I could hear something scrape across the floor. It was faint, but consistent. I got up, turned on all the lights in my apartment, and stared at the ceiling. The noises continued for another minute, then stopped. My heart pounded. I tried to think. Logically, maybe the old floors were expanding, or maybe there was some raccoon in the attic, but it sounded too clear to be an animal. It sounded like actual footsteps and pieces of furniture being moved around the next day at work. I told a coworker about it. He laughed and said old houses do that. He suggested it was probably the pipes. I nodded and tried to stay calm about it. That night, I stayed up late. Later than usual, I waited in my living room with the TV on mute around 1 in the morning. I heard it again. Thud, thud, thud. Right above my head. Then a long scraping sound like a chair being dragged across a wooden floor. I felt my chest tighten. I went up to the foyer and tried to unlock the door leading. Upstairs, but it was locked from the inside. I didn't have a key to that part of the house. Apparently, it was a separate space. I listened at the door. Silence. I went back to my apartment and tried to sleep. My mind raced. I imagined squatters or someone sneaking in, but it didn't make sense. The landlord seemed on top of things, and the mansion was locked up at night. A week passed, and the sounds continued. Every couple of nights, they weren't super loud, but they were distinct. I asked a couple of friends to come over and hang out. I wanted someone else to hear the footsteps. We had dinner, chatted, and waited. It got late. One friend decided to crash on the couch around 2 in the morning. We heard it. Thump, thump, thump. Followed by a scraping noise. My friend shot up from the couch. He looked at me with wide eyes. I felt relieved that someone else witnessed it. We tiptoed to the front hallway and tried to see if we could spot anything upstairs. Through the banister, the hallway light was on, but the staircase was dark. We didn't see any movement. The sound stopped after a few moments. My friend said it sounded like a person walking around. I told him that the landlord insisted no one was up there. A few days later, something else happened. I woke up in the morning and found all my kitchen cabinets open. Not just cracked open, but fully wide. The plates and cups inside were still in place, but every door was open. I stood there confused before I closed them all. I tried to think if I might have left them open somehow, but I never do that. I told myself maybe I forgot to close them after putting the dishes away the night before, but I was sure I hadn't done that. That same day, I got home from work around 7. The cabinets were closed. Like normal, I took a shower, watched some TV, and went to bed around 11. When I got up the next morning, all of them were open again. The drawers were open too. At that point, I felt my stomach twist. I had no explanation for it. I started feeling anxious. Every time I had to open my front door, I'd step inside slowly, half expecting to see the cabinets open. Sometimes they were closed. Sometimes they were open. It became almost like a pattern every other day. And I felt like I was being watched, even though I never saw anyone in the apartment a few times. When I walked from the living room to the hallway, I caught a dark shape in my peripheral vision. It always seemed to move toward the stairs. It happened so quickly that I couldn't get a good look. But it looked like a tall figure I'd rush over and nothing would be there. My heart would pound and my mouth would go dry. I started keeping the lights on more often. I also started checking all the windows. They were always locked. The front door was always locked. No signs of forced entry. I tried to blame it on stress. Maybe I was losing sleep. But the opening cabinets felt too real. One night I got so freaked out by the footsteps that I decided to go upstairs. The main entrance to the upstairs was at the end of the hallway near the front door. There was a closed door leading to a steep staircase. I had never actually been up there. I tried the handle. It was locked. I stood there for a while. Listening, the air felt cold. The hallway had a slight draft, but I remember feeling a chill on my arms. I knocked on the door. No response. I stood there for another minute, feeling my pulse throb in my ear. Then I went back to my apartment that night. I heard the footsteps again at around 2 in the morning. They lasted a full 5 minutes with pauses in between. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My body tense. I called the landlord in the morning and asked if he could come over. He arrived in the afternoon. I explained the noises in the open cabinets. He looked baffled. We both went to the upstairs door and he unlocked it with a ring of keys. We climbed the stairs together, checking every room. The upstairs was empty. Dust covered most surfaces. There were no footprints on the floor, at least not recent ones. The landlord and I checked all the windows. They were locked, no sign of anyone living there, no furniture either. Besides a few old chairs stacked in one corner, the landlord didn't see any sign of pests or animals. We went back downstairs and he apologized for the inconvenience. He said maybe the pipes were causing vibrations, but we both knew that didn't explain the open cabinets. I talked to a few friends about it again. They suggested I install a camera or set up my phone to record at night. So I placed my phone on a shelf in the kitchen, aiming at the cabinets. I hit record and went to sleep the next morning. I checked the footage the cabinets had opened around 3 in the morning, but on the video they just swung open on their own. I didn't see any visible force or person. One moment they were closed, the next moment they slowly opened it. Took about 2 seconds for each door to open, almost like someone was standing there opening them, except there was nothing on camera. My blood went cold. Watching that footage, I showed it to my closest friend. He got quiet and said that it looked like something straight out of a horror movie. Over the next few days, I kept hearing the footsteps. It was never consistent, but they usually happened after midnight. The cabinet incidents continued too. I stopped trying to record them because it just stressed me out more. I couldn't find a rational explanation, and it felt like the more I focused on it, the worse I slept. I started double-checking every lock in the apartment. I even stacked a few boxes against the kitchen cabinets, hoping to catch someone in the ACT, but nothing changed. The boxes stayed in place, but the cabinet still opened sometimes. As I walked from the kitchen to the hallway, I felt a pressure on my shoulders. My arms would get goosebumps, and I'd feel my stomach tense up. There was this oppressive feeling in the air, like the atmosphere got thicker. When I'd look around, I'd see a flicker of movement near the stairs. My heart would hammer, and I'd step forward, but then I'd realize there was nothing there. At least, nothing I could see straight on. I decided to check the upstairs again on my own. I asked the landlord if I could borrow the key just to inspect the place. He was hesitant, but he let me take it for the day. I waited until it was still bright outside. I climbed the stairs. The second floor was large, with several empty rooms connected by a long corridor. The floors creaked a bit. Light came in through tall windows. I checked every corner. Feeling the wood floor under my feet, it didn't feel spooky during the day, but I did notice the temperature was a bit lower than downstairs. I didn't see any footprints or signs of squatting. I opened closets, tested windows, and tapped on the walls. I didn't discover anything unusual. It was just an empty space with dust and a faint musty smell. That night I tried to sleep early. I woke up around 2 in the morning to a loud bang from above. I jerked awake, my heart racing, and grabbed my phone. I turned on my flashlight and stepped into the hallway. It felt freezing. I was wearing just a t-shirt and boxers, but the cold felt sharper than usual. I stood in the hallway, shining my phone's light at the door. To the upstairs, I heard what sounded like furniture scraping again. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. Then everything went quiet. I took a few steps closer. The door was still locked. I felt the handle. It was ice cold. I waited, pressing my ear to the door. Nothing. I walked back to my bedroom, my hands shaking a bit. I didn't sleep much after that. Over the next week, the cabinet incidents didn't happen as often, but I still found them open on 2 separate mornings. Once I found a chair in my living room. It shifted about a foot away from the wall. My front door was locked and the windows were locked, so I couldn't figure out how it moved. I kept feeling a strange presence near the hallway. At night, I tried inviting friends over again, but most of them were spooked after hearing my stories. One friend came and we both sat in the living room with all the lights on. Until around midnight, we heard a faint scraping upstairs, but it didn't last long. He suggested I might want to move out. I was starting to think the same thing. I gave it another couple of weeks, hoping the landlord would figure something out. He had a contractor come check for structural problems or rodents. They found nothing. I was out of explanations. My sleep suffered. I'd wake up multiple times a night, sometimes sweating, sometimes just alert and expecting to hear something. I developed a habit of flipping on every light switch when I got home from work. The apartment that once felt comfortable now felt tense. The final straw was a night when I returned from the grocery store and found every cabinet door in the kitchen open. Yet again, my living room chair was facing the hallway like someone had turned it in that direction. I stood there feeling my chest tightened and my ears started ringing. I waited, listening. The place was silent, but I felt certain I was not alone. I locked the front door, set my groceries on the floor, and walked around flipping lights on as I approached the hallway. I saw that same dark shape in the corner of my eye. It moved toward the stairs. I turned my head quickly, but it was gone. I stood there, my heart racing. My hands were shaking. That moment felt like a breaking point. I couldn't stay calm in my own home anymore. I called the landlord that night and said I was moving out as soon as possible. I gave him my notice and started looking for a new place right away. Within a week, I had packed my stuff and left on my last day. I heard those footsteps one more time in the afternoon. It sounded like slow, heavy steps upstairs, followed by a quick scraping noise. I just grabbed the last of my boxes and walked out. Not looking back, I still don't know what was going on in that old mansion. I never found a logical explanation for the footsteps or the open cabinets or that shadow I saw, but I'll never forget the feeling of being watched or how the air felt cold and heavy. Whenever I walked into that hallway, moving out was the only thing that made sense. I wanted to sleep through the night without the sound of furniture dragging above my head. I wanted to come home and not feel my pulse. Spiked the moment I opened the door. That's all I can tell you. It was an apartment that seemed perfect at first, but after that second month I couldn't take it anymore. Sometimes I still wonder if anyone ever rented the upstairs. I haven't gone back to find out. I felt something was off. The first time I stepped into that old 2-story place, the floors creaked under my boots and the walls looked discolored in weird ways. I told myself it was just age and poor maintenance. I even convinced myself that old buildings have character, but I couldn't ignore the tightness in my stomach whenever I walked into the main bedroom closet. It felt wrong. It smelled musty and stale, like nobody had opened it for years. And the moment I decided to rip off some of the flaky paint, I discovered those scribbled words. They were jagged, uneven lines of text in a corner. It looked like someone had pressed a pencil or maybe a small piece of charcoal into the wall. At first, I only caught random phrases like "no times it hurts" and locked the sentences didn't make sense. They were full of broken grammar, repeated words, and smudges. But the emotion was there, pumping out of those lines, fear, pain, confusion, and then it stopped abruptly, like whoever wrote them got dragged away or forced to leave. I'm not a superstitious guy. I never believed in curses or spirits, but those words made me uneasy. They got stuck in my mind. I tried to brush it off. I thought maybe a squatter got into the house before I bought it. It's an old property after all. People sneak in sometimes and maybe they left those messages, but I saw no footprints in the dust on the floor and nothing pointed to a break-in, no broken windows, no forced locks. I even checked the front door's deadbolt. Everything looked original and undisturbed. I tried to move on. I wanted that closet to look normal. Normal, so I scraped away the rest of the paint. My arms got sore from the repetitive motion. Tiny paint chips and dust stuck to my clothes. A chill ran down my arms, even though it was warm in the room. Every so often, I glanced at those words, half expecting them to change when I wasn't looking. They stayed the same, but the feeling that somebody had stood right there, somebody in distress, wouldn't leave me when I finally removed all the loose paint. I stared at the bare PL after the scribbles were more extensive than I first saw. There were lines on top of lines. Like the person kept trying to rewrite the same phrases in different ways. Some letters were carved into the drywall. Other parts looked rubbed away or scratched off. I didn't make sense of them. It was a mess. But I picked out words like trapped, it's cold, and something that might have been help my throat went dry. I caught myself tapping my foot on the floor, anxious. Then I froze when I realized I wasn't sure why I felt so jumpy. I called a local painting crew to handle the closet. I didn't want to stand in there anymore. I stayed out and let them do their job. They arrived the next morning, 5 of them all in paint-stained clothes and carrying brushes, rollers, and ladders. I heard them joking around about old houses. One of the guys said he'd seen writing on walls before in abandoned places. Another laughed and asked if the place was haunted. They chuckled. I didn't. I kept quiet. I just wanted the words covered and out of sight. About an hour later, I heard banging around in the closet, so I walked down the hall to see if they needed anything. One of the painters came out looking a little uneasy. He said he heard noises in the wall like shuffling, scratching, or movement. He asked if there were rats. I told him I wasn't sure, but I hadn't seen any droppings or chewing anywhere else. He shrugged and went back in, but before he did, I heard him say something about it. Sounding too deliberate, like somebody tapping from the inside. I felt a knot in my gut at that, but I tried to stay calm. Old pipes can knock wood, can creak. You can hear all kinds of weird echoes in a place that's been standing for decades. They primed and painted the closet walls. It took them the rest of the day. The smell of paint got heavy in the house, so I opened the windows. I heard fans whirring. The guys wrapped up around 5 p.m. One of them shook my hand and said the job was done, but recommended I get a professional to check for pests or leaks behind those walls. He said it still sounded off to him. I nodded and paid them. I walked back into the bedroom. After they left, the closet looked fresh with smooth light gray paint. No sign of those scribbles, but when I stepped in, I felt a shiver like a sudden draft. My eyes watered from the paint fumes, but I also felt a sting of anxiety. I turned around and walked out, telling myself I needed fresh air that night. I stayed up. My mattress was on the floor because I still hadn't set up the bed frame. I tried to relax. I watched some videos on my phone. I scrolled through social media around midnight. I heard a low creaking noise like a slow dragging sound that moved from one end of the wall to the other. I held my breath. My body tensed and I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I thought maybe the house was settling, or maybe the pipes were cooling down, but it felt too unnatural, too long. Then it stopped. I tried to ignore it. I forced my eyes shut and kept telling myself that everything was fine, that the paint job fixed it, that I was just psyching myself out. But I kept replaying those scribbled words in my mind. Help, trapped. It's cold. My imagination ran wild, picturing some unknown person stuck behind the walls. But that made no sense, and I tried to dismiss it. Eventually, I passed out from exhaustion. The next day, I felt a little foolish about my nervousness. In daylight, everything seemed normal. The closet looked neat. There was no sign of anything unusual. I went about unpacking more boxes, hooking up my TV in the living room, and setting up a small desk in the spare room. I spent a few hours messing with my internet connection. By afternoon, my back was sore and I was sweaty from carrying stuff up and down the stairs. I decided to take a break and get a glass of water. As I walked past the bedroom closet, I stopped. I wasn't even sure why, but I felt a tingle along my neck. The door was closed. I placed my hand on the doorknob just to check if something felt different. The metal felt cold. I tried to open it, and for a second it felt like it was stuck. Then it gave way, and I peeked inside. Everything was in place. The new paint looked dry, no cracks, no peeling. I stepped in, I listened. My breath was shallow. I didn't hear anything at first, just the sound of my own heartbeat. Then I noticed a faint tapping, maybe on the right-hand side where the wall met the floor. It lasted a couple of seconds and then vanished. I froze, feeling a surge of adrenaline. My palms got clammy. My mouth felt dry. I backed out of the closet and went downstairs. I forced myself to think about a rational explanation. Rodents, old pipes, or something mechanical that had to be it. I called an inspector that afternoon. I told him I needed someone to check for pests or structural issues. He said he could come by the next week. Meanwhile, I tried to focus on other parts of the renovation. I replaced a few light fixtures and tested the outlets. The rest of the house seemed fine, if a bit worn. Sometimes I heard small knocks, but never anything as loud as that second day at night. Though I still woke up once or twice feeling like I heard faint scratching, or sometimes I thought I saw a shadow move near the closet door. Each time my heart pounded and I felt cold sweat on my forehead. I'd sit up, turn on a lamp, and stare at that door until I felt silly for being so jumpy. The next week, the inspector came by. He wore a gray polo shirt and carried a clipboard. He tapped walls, checked the attic, crawled around the basement and asked me questions about the house's age. He seemed puzzled. He said he didn't see any major signs of rats or mice. He didn't see termite damage. He didn't see leaks. The wood looked old but stable. He did mention that the closet wall had a bit of an odd hollow sound, like there might be extra space or a hidden cavity, but he couldn't see any clear entrance to it. He suggested I bring in a contractor if I wanted to open up the wall. I felt a wave of anxiety at the idea of tearing down that wall, but I smiled and said I'd think about it. A few nights later, I got up around 3 a.m. for a glass of water. I was on my way back from the kitchen when I heard a faint voice. I couldn't make out words. It was more like a moan or maybe just a low grumble. It seemed to come from inside the closet. I stopped in the hallway. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my ears. My breathing got short and fast. I crept to the closet door and opened it dark. Nothing but my clothes hanging on the bar. My arms felt tight and my scalp tingled. I listened. Everything was silent. Then a single knock echoed from behind the wall. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. I jumped back and nearly lost my balance. I slammed the door shut and dashed back to my bed. I tried to steady my breathing, but my nerves were shot by morning. I was exhausted, but I was also determined. I called a contractor to check that hidden space. The inspector mentioned I wanted to settle. The contractor came 2 days later with a flashlight, a small camera scope, and some tools. We moved the clothes out of the closet. He tapped around, found a hollow spot, and cut a small rectangular opening in the drywall. We shined a light inside. There was nothing but an empty, dusty void. No signs of animals, just old wooden framing. The contractor said sometimes older houses have unused pockets or weird construction. He offered to open it further, but I said no, I didn't want to tear up more than necessary. He replaced the cut drywall and sealed it. Then he left. I paid him. Feeling both relieved and uneasy, I stood in that closet after he was gone. The patch job was fresh and still drying. My heart was still racing, but I tried to slow my breathing and reassure myself we found nothing inside the wall. No wires, no pipes, no rodents, nothing. So what was making those sounds? I walked out and decided I needed a break from this house. I got in my car and drove around the neighborhood, picked up some groceries, ate at a diner. I avoided coming back until I felt calmer that evening. I forced myself to go through a normal routine. I cooked, pasta, watched some sports highlights, and took a shower. The feeling of hot water on my back helped me relax. Then I went upstairs to the bedroom. The closet door was slightly ajar. I hadn't left it that way. My stomach clenched. I told myself it might have been the contractor earlier. Maybe he didn't close it firmly. I approached the door. I heard a faint scraping noise like something sliding on the floor. I flung the door open and slicked on the light switch. The closet was empty. My clothes were still on the rod. Nothing was on the floor. The new drywall patch looked intact. The scraping sound stopped. I forced myself to speak out loud. I said, "Who's there?" My voice sounded tense and shaky. I heard my own pulse in my ears. No answer, no noise, just my rapid breathing. I stared at the walls and the ceiling. Everything looked normal. My eyes scanned every inch. Then I stepped back, shut the door, and went to bed. I couldn't sleep well. I kept tossing and turning, feeling prickles on my skin. The following days were a blur of more attempts at normal life. I went to work, made phone calls, dealt with small tasks around the house, but each time I passed that closet, I felt on edge. Sometimes I heard tapping, sometimes I heard nothing at all. I started hesitating before I opened the bedroom door, half expecting to see the closet open or clothes tossed on the floor, but everything stayed in place. Though the closet door seemed to never stay fully closed, I started wedging a small piece of cardboard under it just to keep it shut. That helped me sleep a bit better, at least for a few nights. One afternoon, I decided to check the text under the new paint. Maybe I could see the outlines. I grabbed a strong flashlight and aimed it along the closet wall. I noticed a few faint ridges under the paint where the original writing had been carved. My heart beat faster as I traced the edges with my fingertip. I made out partial letters. That same dread filled my chest. It made me sweat. I didn't understand why I felt so threatened, but I did. The closet felt tight. Like the air was heavier in there that evening. While I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom, I heard a thud in the bedroom. I hurried out, toothbrush in hand. The closet door was wide open. One of the wire hangers lay on the floor. It had fallen off the rod. I picked it up. My hand shook. The metal felt cold. I hung it back up. My nerves were on edge. I felt a pounding in my temples. I closed the closet door and returned to the bathroom, trying not to look in the mirror because I knew I looked pale and sweaty. I don't know what's going on with this place. I haven't considered leaving because I already sank a lot of money into the purchase, but I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong with that closet. The words I found that first day keep popping into my head when I'm trying to relax. I can picture the shape of the letters. I still remember help. It's cold. No time, and locked my heart. Skips a beat when I think about it. It felt like a plea, but I don't want to speculate too much. I keep telling myself it's just leftover graffiti from somebody who stayed here before, but I can't ignore the sounds, the tapping, and the door that won't stay closed. I've considered sealing up that closet entirely, just putting in some drywall and removing the door. I might do it, but a part of me hates the idea of running from what might be a simple trick of the mind. I even wondered if it's stress or exhaustion getting to me, making me hear things that aren't there for now. I avoid the closet unless I have to grab clothes. I get in and get out. Sometimes I linger to check if I hear anything. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I don't. The painters won't return my calls anymore. They probably think I'm nuts. Because I ask them too many questions about noises, I don't have any proof of anything. Supernatural or bizarre, I only have my own unease and those scribbled words hidden under fresh paint. So that's the situation, an old 2-story house with a closet that makes me tense. I can't see anything there, but I can feel it in my bones. The words I found on that wall keep replaying in my mind. The painters said they heard things. The inspector said the space was empty. The contractor found nothing inside the wall, but I still hear knocking. Scratching or whispers in the middle of the night, I think. About those words, and my skin prickles with goosebumps when I step inside that closet. My breath catches and my stomach tightens. I can't explain any of it, but I know it's there and I'm not sure what to do next. I never expected my own home to make me question everything I thought I knew. One night it did just that. It was an ordinary evening at first, and I was in my living room. I heard some faint noises coming from upstairs. They weren't loud, but they were enough to pull my attention away from the TV. There was a soft thumping sound like something sliding across the floor. My initial thought was that a box might have tipped over or maybe some items had shifted. I wasn't scared at that moment. I was just annoyed that I'd have to go upstairs to check. Let me describe the upstairs area. There's a flight of wooden steps that creaks under any slight pressure. The hallway up there is short and leads to two storage rooms. One door is on the left and the other door is at the very end of the hallway. Straight ahead, when you reach the top, I stored old furniture, broken electronics, and random boxes in both. Sometimes I would hear odd noises at night. I always assumed it was the house settling or maybe some rodent scurrying around that night. Though things felt different, I got off the couch, walked to the base of the stairs, and flicked the light switch. The upstairs light didn't turn on. I tried again, and nothing changed. The first bit of uneasy tension set in the downstairs lights were on, so it wasn't a full power outage. I figured the bulb might have burned out. I kept an extra flashlight in a drawer in the kitchen, but instead of fetching it right away, I thought the overhead light in the storage room might still work. So I went up the steps in the dark. The moment I placed my foot on the first stair, it let out a sharp creak. I exhaled and tried to keep my balance. Holding the handrail, the air felt stale and still. By the time I reached the top, my eyes adjusted slightly, but it was hard to see. I could make out the shapes of boxes and a few chairs near the walls. I reached for the light switch in the storage room on the left. I flicked it. Nothing that meant the hallway bulb and this room's bulb were either both dead or something else was going on. I felt a tightness in my chest. My shoulders tensed and I stood in the dark for a moment, listening for anything out of place. The house was silent now. No more sliding or rustling. I decided I'd feel better if I had something blocking the top of the stairs while I closed the door behind me. I know it sounds strange, but I was afraid of something coming up from behind. I wanted a clear boundary, even if it was just a piece of junk. I spotted an old floor fan with a heavy base near some boxes. I picked it up and then dragged it to the top of the stairway. I set it there, letting the round base press against the top step. It felt stable. I even gave it a small push to see if it would move. It didn't budge. Then I turned back and moved to close the door behind me. As I reached for the door, my skin crawled. I heard a small scraping sound behind me. I turned around. The fan was still there, but I sensed a movement. It wasn't visible, though it was just a soft scrape, like something rubbing against the wood. I stood still. My breath shallow, my eyes were locked on the fan, but it wasn't moving. In that second, I tried to calm myself. I thought maybe I was spooked by the darkness and my ears were playing tricks. I closed the door, letting out a nervous sigh as the latch clicked. Then my breath caught in my throat. The fan started sliding toward the edge of the stairway, the bass gliding across the wooden floor. It didn't tip over, it didn't roll or bounce. It slid as if someone was slowly pushing it from behind. My mouth went dry and my knees felt weak. I wanted to say something, maybe yell, but nothing came out. I was frozen watching this old fan move on its own. It reached the top step and paused. Still upright, still balanced, then it continued inch by inch going down the stairs. The scraping sound was clear now, a low, steady noise. My heart pounded so hard that my ears throbbed. I stepped forward, but I didn't actually touch the fan. I didn't dare. Something inside me said not to interfere. It kept sliding. Step after step, each movement controlled and smooth. It didn't tumble. It wasn't bouncing off the wood. It was a slow, deliberate glide going down, like gravity didn't work the way it should when it reached the bottom. It stopped gently. Bass still on the floor, the rest of it upright. I released a breath I didn't realize I was holding. There was no crash, no loud thud. It just came to a halt. My stomach felt heavy. I could feel sweat trickling down the back of my neck. I stayed at the top of the stairs for a few seconds, staring down at the fan. My mind raced, but I had no logical explanation. I finally forced my feet to move. I stepped carefully down each stair, one hand on the banister. My entire body was tense, like I was bracing for something to jump out at me. When I reached the bottom step, I hovered there and stared at the fan. It looked normal, not damaged at all. I leaned in, turned it slightly, and tested its weight. It felt the same as always, heavy. If I tried to push it on the floor, it usually took a good shove to move it, but it had moved so easily just moments before the stairs behind me were empty. No one was there. I looked back up to the dark hallway. I couldn't see anything except shadows. My breathing was loud in my ears. My pulse thumped in my neck. I waited, straining to hear anything. Silence. I turned my attention back to the fan. It sat there, not giving me any answers. I moved it a little, trying to see if maybe the floor was slanted or if there was some leftover momentum. Nothing felt odd. The floor was solid and it needed effort from me to get it to move. I turned and flicked the downstairs light switch off, then on again, hoping maybe that would somehow restore the upstairs power. It didn't. The downstairs lighting still worked fine. I flicked the upstairs switch once more. Still nothing. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed my flashlight from the drawer. My hand shook as I clicked it on the bright beam. Made me blink a few times, then I headed back to the base of the stairs. I pointed the flashlight up. The steps looked normal. No broken boards or anything out of place. I aimed the beam at the top, landing. Nothing unusual. My hands felt clammy and my breathing was shallow. I forced myself to take a deep breath. I climbed back up, shining the light around the hallway. The walls were the same. The boxes stood where I'd left them. The air was a bit colder than usual, but I figured that might just be my nerves. I went into the storage room on the left, scanning the corners, some old furniture boxes and other junk. Nothing that should move on its own. Then I checked the other storage room. Same story, piles of dusty items and no sign of forced entry or anything. Disturbed, my heart rate was still high, but I tried to act methodical. I ran my hands along the walls looking for hidden panels or holes, but found none. I jiggled the wires of the overhead lights, but they didn't turn on. I didn't see any frayed wiring or anything obvious. I turned off the flashlight for a moment. The darkness pressed in. It felt suffocating. I turned the flashlight back on and shook my head. I didn't want to stay up there any longer than I had to. I walked down the stairs, taking each step slowly. The fan was still at the bottom, standing exactly as I left it. I stared at it for a few seconds, then decided to put it away. I picked it up, carried it to the living room, and set it in a corner. I couldn't help checking the base again. It was intact, not wobbly, nothing about. It was broken or odd. It was just a normal old fan. My heart was still pounding, and I felt a light tremble in my hands. I tried to gather my thoughts. I went through every logical reason I could come up with. Maybe I'd accidentally bumped it and it slid, but the angle of the stairs made that impossible without tipping. Also, it moved slowly, defying the normal pull of gravity. It felt like someone had guided it. I'd never seen anything like that in my life. I tried to calm myself by turning on the TV again. The noise helped distract me for a moment, but my ears kept straining to hear another sound upstairs. Every little creak in the house made my adrenaline spike. I got up a few times, moving to the bottom of the stairs, shining the flashlight up, but saw nothing. It was just quiet. Eventually, I turned off the TV and sat there listening to the silence. I don't know how much time passed before I finally decided to go to bed. I locked every door. I turned on every light downstairs and even left the flashlight by my bed that night. I didn't sleep well. I woke up every few hours, convinced I heard a thump or a faint scrape. Each time I sat up, turned on the flashlight, and peered around, the bedroom was empty. Nothing unusual still. I felt on edge and my body stayed tense. The entire night, by morning, I had a dull headache from lack of rest. I forced myself out of bed, determined to check the upstairs in daylight. So after my morning coffee, I went back up, this time in full daylight. Sunlight filtered in through the small windows in the storage rooms. Everything looked normal. I checked the bulbs. Neither was burned out when I tested them in a different lamp. They worked fine. I tested the switches again. No response. I went down to the breaker box in the garage. Nothing was tripped. I flicked each breaker off and on, then the upstairs lights clicked on when I tested them again. That was weird because the breakers hadn't been in the off position. They all looked normal. I stood there under the now working light, looking at the place where the fan had been. The floor was smooth, not warped. I touched it with my hand, felt around for a draft, an air current, something that might push a heavy object. Nothing. The entire morning I tried to convince myself I was missing a simple explanation. Maybe there was some strange electrical problem, maybe a weird tilt in the floor, but the fan glided in a direction that required it to go against the usual angle of descent. Especially in the first few steps, the memory made my stomach tense again over the years. Since that happened, I've brought up this story with friends and family. Some think I'm exaggerating or misremembering, others suggest I was overtired or that I experienced some sort of hallucination. But I know what I saw. I can't get the image of that fan sliding out of my head. I've gone over every detail in my mind 1,000 times. I've checked and rechecked those stairs, the fan, and the possibility of an intruder. There was never anything sign of forced entry, and I found no footprints or anything like that. When I tell people I stick to the facts, I was upstairs, the lights wouldn't turn on, I placed the fan at the top of the stairs so I could close the door. Suddenly it slid down, it didn't tumble or bounce. It moved like it was being guided by a pair of invisible hands. It reached the bottom gently with no damage. That's exactly how it happened. I haven't been able to explain it, and no one else has given me a satisfying reason. After that night, I avoided storing anything new upstairs for a while. I started putting stuff in the garage instead. I still went upstairs from time to time, especially to get items I needed, but I always felt uneasy even with the lights working again. The memory stuck in my head some nights. I'd pause before going up, then decide I didn't really need whatever was stored there. I've never seen the fan move like that again. I kept it in the living room corner for a long time, then eventually got rid of it during a garage sale. I don't know why, but I felt better not having it around. The new owner probably has no idea about its history. Maybe it's just a normal fan to them, and that's fine. Nothing else as bizarre has happened in my home since that night. Sometimes I still hear a random noise upstairs, but I chalk it up to the usual house sounds. I've thought about setting up cameras or leaving my phone to record, but I never actually followed through. Part of me doesn't want to capture anything unexplainable on video. I don't know how I'd handle more evidence that defies logic. Even so, I'll never forget the sight of that old fan gliding down the steps as if pulled by an invisible force. It's made me look at my home differently. It's made me question how things can happen without a straightforward reason. I still shake my head when I remember the soft scraping sound and how I stood there, frozen, unable to move or yell. I'm not a person who believes in a lot of wild stories, but this one is mine, and it happened right in front of me. If someone asks me about the weirdest thing I've ever experienced, I don't hesitate. I tell them about that night. I don't dress it up or try to make it sound dramatic. I just say it how it happened. I heard noises, the lights wouldn't turn on, I put a fan at the top of the stairs and it slid down in a way that shouldn't be possible. That's it, I've spent years wondering how and I still don't have an answer. I first noticed something was wrong when I heard that loud bang coming from next door. It was early evening and I was wiping down my kitchen counter. The noise sounded like a window slamming shut or maybe a door getting stuck. The house next to mine had been empty for a few days and I didn't expect anyone there. My muscles tensed up and I felt a strange tingling in my gut. I set the rag aside and walked to my living room window. The lights in that big old house were off. The curtains were drawn, everything looked still, but I stood there for a full minute, waiting for another noise. Nothing else happened, so I tried to shrug it off. Still, my heart was beating faster than usual. I moved into this neighborhood about 5 years ago. It's quiet, the type of place where people mow their lawns on Saturday mornings and smile at each other when they pass by. The house next door is bigger than mine with a wide yard and a tall fence out back. People have rented it, but no one stays more than a few months. At first I thought it was just bad luck or that the rent was too high. I asked the guy at the local real estate office about it. He gave me a half smile and said it's a tough proper to rent. Then he changed the subject. I've seen plenty of renters come and go. They show up, unload. Furniture wave politely and try to settle in. Then a few months later, they load up a truck again and disappear. No big moving sales, no friendly goodbyes, just gone over time. I picked up on odd details. I would hear noises late at night. Sometimes I'd hear a car door slam in the early morning around 3 or 4. There were also times I'd catch a glimpse of movement in one of the upstairs windows when the house was supposed to be empty once. After a tenant moved out, I heard something like a muffled voice in there. I walked outside and stood on my porch trying to figure out if I was imagining things. The lights were off, no car in the driveway, but there was this faint vibration in the air like a hum. It lasted a few seconds and stopped. My skin felt cold, and I remember taking a deep breath, trying to calm down the last tenant left. So suddenly that I didn't even get a chance to learn his name. I only recognized his face from a few quick waves across the fence. He never seemed unfriendly, just tired. He would come home from work, park his car, and go straight inside. He didn't leave lights on at night, and I never heard a television or music. Then one day I saw a moving truck in the driveway by sunset. The house was empty again. No explanation. That was the third tenant in the last year. I admit I got curious. I asked a few neighbors about it. One or two mentioned old stories, something about strange accidents in the past. They didn't elaborate, and I didn't press them for details. I wanted straightforward information, not rumors. Most people just shrugged and changed the topic. It felt like they were uncomfortable. Their eyes would dart away, and they'd give me short answers like they were afraid to say too much. It put me on edge. My stomach twisted. Every time I passed that place, the windows always looked dull, like they'd been smeared with grime. The yard was neat enough, but there was a thin layer of dead leaves near the fence that never seemed to blow away. One late afternoon, I was out on my own back porch. The sun was dipping down and the wind was picking up. I heard a loud thud again. This time more violent, like a door hitting a wall. I looked over and saw the upstairs window on the side of that house hanging open. The curtains inside were shaking. Then I spotted a silhouette. The figure stood still. Half blocked by the curtains, but I could see enough to know someone was there. My chest felt tight and my skin went hot. There was no sign of a car in the driveway. The lights were off. I just stared, trying to see more detail. Then the curtains jerked shut. My heart pounded, and I considered calling out, but my throat felt dry. I stood there, hands shaking a bit, and waited. But nothing else happened. 2 days later, I heard the rumble of another moving truck I watched from my living room window as a couple of men loaded furniture and boxes into it. A middle-aged woman stood on the lawn, arms crossed, looking stressed. Her forehead was creased, and she kept rubbing her elbows like she was cold. It wasn't that chilly outside. She looked over her shoulder a few times at the front door like she expected something. I couldn't see anyone else around. She never even glanced in my direction. They finished in under an hour, and then they were gone. No goodbyes, no final checks. The house was empty again. That was the moment I decided I couldn't keep ignoring it. I felt an urge to do something. Even if it was just to step onto the property and look around. The next morning, I walked outside and stood in front of that house. The windows were shut. The curtains drawn. The front door was a dull white paint chipped at the edges. I noticed scratches on the doorknob like someone had struggled to unlock it a few times. The porch looked fine, just dusty. A gust of wind swept across the yard, and I noticed a slight creak from the wooden planks under my feet. I wasn't sure if I should knock. The sign from the real estate company was back on the lawn, flapping a bit in the breeze. My heart thumped in my chest, and I felt a twinge in my stomach like I might regret taking another step still. I reached for the doorknob. It was locked. I tried the handle once. Nothing. I peered through the window next to the door. All I saw was a hallway with a staircase. The place felt hollow. I exhaled and stepped back, fighting a shaky feeling in my legs. Then I turned around and went home, trying to calm the tension in my jaw. I decided to call the real estate office. Later that day, the phone rang a few times, and then a woman answered. I asked if the house next door was available for rent again. She said it was. Her voice sounded rushed. I pressed her politely, asking if there was anything special I should know. She paused, then said it was just older than it looks, and that the owners were eager to find stable tenants. Her tone suggested she wasn't going to say anything else. I thanked her and hung up. My stomach churned with frustration that night. I couldn't relax. I paced around my kitchen. I kept thinking about that silhouette in the window. It bothered me that people kept leaving without saying a word around midnight. I heard a strange rattling noise from outside, like the wind shaking a loose gutter or a metal pipe. I went to my bedroom window and parted the curtains. My heart started racing when I saw a faint light flicker in one of the upstairs windows of the house next door. It looked like someone moving through the dark with a small flashlight or maybe a candle. The light bobbed for a few seconds and then vanished. My hands felt clammy and I realized I was breathing too fast. I forced myself to stay at the window, waiting for another sign of movement, but it never came. The next morning, I went about my routine, trying to push away my unease. I showered, brewed coffee, and sat in my living room reading the news on my phone every few minutes. My gaze would drift to the blinds, and I'd remember the weird GL I'd seen the night before. My chest felt a faint tightness, and I found myself clenching my fists. I decided I had to check it out in a more direct way. I couldn't just watch from the sidelines anymore. Maybe it was a mistake to get involved, but I figured I would rather know than keep guessing. That afternoon, I noticed a maintenance van parked in the driveway of the house next door. A man in overalls stepped out and pulled a large toolbox from the back. I walked over and ENT introduced myself. He was polite enough. Gave me his name, I think it was Carl, and said he was there to fix some wiring issues. I asked him if he'd been there before. He shook his head. Said it was his first time. He seemed in a hurry, so I didn't push too hard. I just told him I lived next door and that if he needed anything, he could knock on my door. He nodded and went inside. I stayed outside for a while, pretending to rake up some leaves along my driveway. I kept glancing at that house. Part of me hoped Carl would come running out with some crazy story, but nothing happened. An hour later, he emerged, toolbox in hand, wiping sweat from his brow. He caught my eye and gave me a short wave. I put down the rake and walked toward him. I asked how things went. He shrugged and said, "Wiring's old, but it's not that bad. Just needs a few replacements here and there." I could tell he was being cautious with his words. He avoided looking at the windows. Then he said, "Strange place, though. Feels like the walls are never mind." He trailed off, gave me a polite smile, and quickly got in his van. I watched him drive away. A chill crept up my neck. I felt a knot in my stomach again that night. I set my alarm for midnight. I wanted to see if anything strange would happen again. I lay in bed listening to every creak in my own house. My heart was pounding in my ears at midnight. I got up, put on a hoodie, and stepped outside. The moon was bright and the air felt cool. I walked across my yard until I reached the fence line. I stood there looking at that big dark house. I could see the upstairs windows. All of them were black. No lights, no movement. The real estate sign was still there, swaying in a light breeze. I felt my pulse throbbing in my temples. Then I heard a faint scraping sound from the side of the house. It stopped almost as soon as it started. I pressed my lips together, trying to steady my breathing. I walked along the sidewalk, staying on the opposite side of the street. I wanted a better angle on the windows. About halfway along the block, I looked up at the second floor. A curtain moved. It was a smooth, quick motion, like someone pulling it aside to peek out. My nerves lit up. I froze, my eyes locked on that window for a second. I thought I saw a pale face behind the glass, but it could have been my eyes playing tricks on me in the moonlight. The curtain dropped back into place. The street felt empty and quiet. Aside from my own pounding heart, I took a few steps back. My skin prickled and I felt sweat gathering at my temples. I decided I'd had enough for one night. I headed home, locked my door, and double-checked the windows. My hands were shaking in my bedroom. I tried to distract myself with my phone, but I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my head. I wondered who or what was in that house. Were they just squatting? Was there some weird leak in the wiring that made everyone uneasy? Or was there something else going on? The next day, I woke up feeling exhausted. I spent hours trying to keep busy, cleaning, cooking, anything to avoid staring out the window around lunchtime. I went outside to grab the mail. A real estate agent was in the driveway next door showing the property to a man who looked about my age. I watched from my mailbox as they walked around the side of the house. The agent gestured to the yard and the fence. The prospective renter nodded, his hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. I called out a casual hello, and they both turned my way. The renter gave me a tight smile and waved. I nodded and went back inside. I didn't want to interfere, but my stomach clenched again. I felt a rush of anxiety. Maybe he would move in and leave just as fast as the others. Maybe I'd see him loading a truck a week from now. Eyes filled with confusion or fear as evening approached. Clouds rolled in the sky, got dark, and wind whipped through the neighborhood. I heard the old house's shutters rattle. I stepped onto my porch to secure a loose chair. I glanced at the house and saw movement in the upstairs window again, just for a second, like a flicker of a figure. Then I heard a dull thump, like a door being slammed somewhere inside. My pulse raced. I went inside, shut my door and locked it now every time I even walk past that house. I get this sick feeling in my gut. It's violent. It was subtle, but it was there. I propped myself up on my elbows and held my breath for a moment. I thought it might be a small earthquake, but it didn't escalate or fade in a way I would expect from something like that. It felt more like a big truck passing by, except there was no engine noise and the vibration continued for about half a minute. Once it stopped, I waited in silence. My heart was pounding and my skin felt clammy. I stayed still for a while. Listening, I heard a soft creaking from the hallway, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. I tried to convince myself it was just the cabin settling. Eventually, I fell back asleep, telling myself it was no big deal. The next morning, I had to leave early. I took a quick shower and noticed the water smelled a bit metallic. I made some instant coffee and stood by the window looking out at the backyard. There was a thick patch of tall grass and a few old tree stumps scattered around. The smell of wet earth filled the air, even though it hadn't rained in days. I left for work and didn't think much more about it when I got back that evening. Everything looked calm. The sun was setting, and I felt more comfortable now that I'd spent a night there. I heated a can of soup on the stove and ate in silence. I called a friend to chat just to distract myself around midnight. I went to bed again expecting to sleep without issues, but right before 1 in the morning, the same faint trembling returned. It lasted around 30 seconds. Just like before, I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. Nothing else seemed to move, and the cabin wasn't making any other noises, so I eventually lay back down. My mind was racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. That pattern repeated every night. The trembling would always happen at the same time. Around 1 in the morning. By the 4th night, I started to feel anxious as soon as it got dark. My chest felt tight and my pulse would speed up. I felt cold sweat sometimes, especially when I thought about that strange vibration. I tried to ignore it by reading or watching something on my laptop, but it kept creeping into my mind. The next weekend, I invited a few friends to come over. I figured having company would help me relax. They arrived on Saturday afternoon. They brought some beer and snacks. We set up some folding chairs in the main room. At first, they joked about the cabin, calling it rustic and cozy, but after a few hours, I noticed them getting uncomfortable. One friend said she felt elated. Another said his head was throbbing. A third friend, who normally never complained, said his stomach felt like it was churning. I opened the windows to get fresh air, but that odd damp earth smell persisted. It clung to the walls, and the breeze outside didn't carry it away. Then, without any warning, one of the windows slid shut on its own. It wasn't windy, there was just a soft breeze. The latch wasn't locked, so maybe it was misaligned, but it happened a second time, and it looked too deliberate. My friends went quiet. One of them tried to open it again, but it slammed shut like someone had pulled it from the outside. I felt my chest tighten. Nobody laughed or made jokes at that point. They just stared at me. Me and at each other later. 2 of them stepped outside for fresh air because they felt nauseous. One said he needed to sit in his car for a minute. The other person followed him. The rest of us stayed inside, but I noticed an odd pressure in my ears. Like when you drive up a mountain, it made me feel dizzy. I kept swallowing, trying to pop my ears, but it didn't help. My skin felt clammy and my hands started to shake. The overhead light flickered once, then went back to normal. Everyone looked on edge. We decided to move the little gathering outside, hoping to feel better. We dragged a couple of chairs to the front porch, but we still sensed something off around the cabin. The air smelled stale. We didn't stay much longer. My friends left before nightfall because they said they couldn't handle the headache and nausea. I said goodbye and watched them drive off. I remember feeling alone and exposed. The cabin seemed even smaller after they left that night. I tried to stay up until after 1 in the morning just to observe the vibration. I sat on the couch in the main room, phone in hand, checking the time right at 1 a.m. I felt the floor tremble. I stood up and walked into the hallway. Listening, it felt like something big was passing right under the floorboards, but there was no sound of movement outside. The vibration stopped, and for a moment, I thought I heard a muffled thump, like a door closing in another part of the cabin. But the place had only a few rooms, and I was sure no one else was there. I broke into a sweat and realized my breathing was shallow. My heart hammered in my chest, and my hands felt numb. I told myself I was imagining things, but my legs wouldn't stop shaking. I backed up slowly, moving toward the front door. Then the overhead light flickered again. I had trouble swallowing. My throat felt dry. The light stopped flickering and everything went silent. The air felt stuffy, like no oxygen was circulating. After a few minutes, I forced myself to go back to bed, but I couldn't sleep until early morning over the next week. The same events repeated. The trembling at 1 in the morning never failed. Sometimes the windows opened by themselves. The smell of wet soil lingered everywhere it was in the bedroom, the hallway, even inside the closet. One day I tried to pinpoint the source of the smell, thinking maybe there was a leak or some rotting wood, but I found no obvious signs. The wood on the walls seemed damp in some spots, yet there was no water stain or mold. I tried lighting candles, but the smell overpowered them at work. I had trouble focusing. My head felt heavy, like a mild headache that never fully went away. My eyes stung sometimes, especially when I thought about going back to the cabin. I felt a constant tension in my stomach and my appetite dropped. I'd go through the motions of my job, but all I could think about was what was happening at night. One night I decided I'd had enough. I called the landlord to complain. He sounded annoyed and said he had no idea what I was talking about. He claimed previous tenants never mentioned strange vibrations or smells, but he also didn't seem surprised. He just told me to make sure I was closing the windows properly and to check if the heater was making the noise. He brushed me off and said he couldn't refund me unless I found someone else to take over the place. I felt trapped. I didn't have a lot of money to rent somewhere else, and I needed a place to live while I worked on my project. I tried to stick it out, telling myself that I was being paranoid, but my body was telling me otherwise. I was constantly tense. My muscles felt tight and my back ached from sleeping poorly every evening. My pulse would spike when the sun went down. The final straw came about 2 weeks in. I dozed off on the couch, hoping to avoid the bedroom altogether around 1 in the morning. The trembling woke me up this time. It seemed a bit stronger than before. The floor felt like it was buzzing under my feet. I stood up and grabbed my phone to check the time, right on the dot 1 a.m. As I stood there, the overhead light in the living area flickered again, but more erratically than before. The window at the far side of the room slid open with a loud scraping sound. I rushed over to close it, and I could see the yard outside dark, and still the smell of damp dirt flooded in like a gust of foul air. It made me gag. My head started pounding. I slammed the window shut and locked it. At that moment, I heard creaking in the hallway as if someone was walking toward me. My ears buzzed and my chest tightened. Sweat dripped down my temples and I felt my legs tremble. I forced myself to walk to the bedroom to grab my keys and wallet. I stepped inside the room and the smell was even stronger there. It made my stomach clench. My eyes watered. I switched on the bedroom light and the bulb flickered. I couldn't see anything moving, but I felt like someone was standing in the corner watching me. My scalp tingled and I had to remind myself to breathe. I yanked my wallet off the nightstand and reached for my keys on top of a small dresser. I stumbled back into the living area. I didn't bother packing my clothes or my electronics. I just wanted to get out. As I reached the front door, the shaking stopped. Everything went quiet again. The sudden silence felt oppressive. The single overhead light still flickered and I kept glancing around, expecting to see something in the shadows. My chest felt tight and my mouth tasted like metal. I swung the door open and stepped outside. The air was cool and my heart was racing so hard it hurt. The nausea hit me in waves. My legs felt weak, like I might collapse. I turned around to lock the door, but paused. Something in the dark interior made my skin crawl like there were eyes on me. I still locked the door just on instinct, then hurried to my car sitting in the driver's seat. I noticed my hands were shaking so much that I struggled to put the key in the ignition. After a few tries, I started the engine. My headlights lit up the front of the cabin. The windows were all closed now and the place looked empty. I could still smell the damp earth even inside my car. I gripped the steering wheel trying to calm down. Then I backed out and sped away. I drove to a cheap motel about half an hour down the road. I checked in for the night still feeling dizzy. My clothes were damp with sweat, and I had a splitting head that night. I barely slept the next morning. I returned to the cabin just to grab my remaining stuff. I went in quickly, keeping the doors wide open. I packed whatever I could into my car. The smell was as strong as ever, and the floor creaked under my feet. I felt like something was right behind me the whole time, waiting for me to linger. My chest was tight, and my breath came in gasps. I didn't look around too much. I just grabbed my bags and left. Locked up and drove off without a word. When I was pulling out of the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror for a split second. It seemed like the front window's curtain moved, like someone was peeking through it. My eyes watered and my throat felt dry. Part of me wanted to accelerate and not look back. Another part of me felt relief. I sensed that whatever was there was either sad or satisfied that I was leaving, but I didn't stop. I kept my eyes on the road and never returned. I lost my deposit, but I didn't care. I found a different place to stay far from that cabin. I still have nightmares sometimes in those dreams. The floor starts trembling at exactly 1 in the morning and I smell that damp earth. I wake up sweating. My stomach clenched tight. I never figured out what caused it. I don't plan on investigating. I'm just glad I'm done with that place, and I hope nobody else has to stay there alone at night. Feeling that silent force. Under the floorboards, I never expected a rental house to shake me up. I saw a listing for a stone cottage on a mountainside and thought it looked perfect. I wanted fresh air, a quiet spot, and something different from the usual apartments I'd lived in on the day I first stepped inside. I felt the cold under my feet and noticed how the light hit the exposed beams in the ceiling. Everything looked sturdy with thick walls and large stones stacked together. I signed the contract fast, carried my boxes in the following week, and felt good about the place. At first, I remember the first night I slept there. I had a single lamp in the living room and a small fire going in the old fireplace. The fire snapped and popped, and I could feel the warmth, but only in that room. The hallway leading to the bedrooms felt like a different climate zone. I put my hand on the stone wall and felt it draw the heat away. I figured it was just the way older houses worked. I shrugged it off, slept soundly, and got up the next day to finish unpacking. The first couple of weeks passed quietly. There was always a chill in some rooms. Even when the fireplace roared for hours, I discovered the best way to keep warm was to stay close to the main room or bring a space heater with me when I worked on my laptop. Still, I felt something odd in the evenings, a slight feeling that I wasn't alone in the house. I told myself it was just the wind or my imagination. The floors sometimes creaked. The old pipes groaned when I turned on the tap. I told myself it was normal in a house this old. But one morning I woke up and walked to the kitchen the moment my feet hit the tile in the hallway. I saw a set of wet footprints. It had rained a little a few days before, but I remembered that morning's forecast said no recent rain. I lived alone and hadn't had visitors over in several days. Yet there they were, damp footprints that trailed from the front door across the living room and ended at the entrance to a guest bedroom. I looked around for any sign of a leak or a spill, but the footprints were shaped like bare feet. I didn't like that. My body reacted right away. My arms tingled with goosebumps and the back of my neck grew stiff. I stood there trying to figure out how water could have gotten inside. Then I checked my own feet. They were dry. I took a few photos with my phone, wiped up the prints, and went on with my day. Not sure what to think the next few nights. I felt uneasy. My ears tuned into every small noise. The walls made faint popping sounds as the temperature dropped at night. My second bedroom, the one where I stored some boxes, stayed cold. No matter what I did, I put a small heater there and let it run for hours, but the stone floors stayed cold to the touch. I kept the door closed most of the time. I didn't want to deal with the chill or the clutter one. Late evening, I was watching a show on my laptop when I heard a scuffling noise from the hallway. I paused the video and listened. It was soft, almost like a shuffle of feet. I walked over with the laptop still in my hand, but I saw no one. The house felt like it was holding its breath. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself old houses make weird sounds, but I couldn't ignore the sense that something was just out of sight. A few days later, I woke up and found another set of wet footprints. This time they LED from the front door across the living room, then down the hallway, stopping at the same unoccupied bedroom that made my pulse. Spike, I opened the front door, looked outside, and the ground was dry. No rain for at least 2 days. I checked my windows and doors. Everything was locked. I walked inside, following each wet track. They looked just like the last ones. I put my hand on the footprints. They felt cold. I stood there waiting, looking around for any movement. My stomach felt twisted and my arms felt numb. That level of confusion got to me. I had no idea how to explain it. After a while, I cleaned them up again, but the strange part was that the footprints stopped in front of the same wall inside that bedroom, the one. Facing the hallway, I tapped the wall expecting it to sound solid, and it did sort of. But when I pressed my ear against it, I heard a faint clicking noise, like someone softly tapping stone with their nails. It was too soft to pinpoint. I felt my scalp tighten, and I jerked back. There was no rational explanation that popped into my head. I left the room, closed the door, and tried to push it out of my mind. I told a friend Victor about it. He didn't make fun of me, which was surprising. He wanted to see for himself, so I invited him over. One afternoon, we had coffee in the living room. He said the house looked impressive, but he mentioned the chill in the hallway right away. I saw him rub his arms and glance at the closed door. I asked him if he felt anything weird. He admitted that something in the air felt heavy, like the atmosphere was thicker near that particular bedroom. I walked him over to the door, opened it, and showed him the wall. We both stood there, listening. Nothing. No noises, but we didn't linger. He said something felt off, and I agreed. Over the next week, I began to find damp footprints more frequently. Sometimes they appeared in the early morning, other times I saw them in the middle of the day. I started keeping track, writing down dates and times. No pattern stood out except that they always ended at that wall. I wondered if maybe there was a busted pipe somewhere causing some condensation, but that wouldn't explain the shape of footprints or the path from the front door. I tried touching the walls in different rooms to see if I felt moisture. Everything felt dry except for that one section in the guest bedroom, which always felt a bit colder. One night I decided to sit in the living room without the TV on. Lights low and wait. It was around midnight and the wind was calm outside. I could hear the crackle of the fire, the hum of the fridge in the kitchen, and my own breathing. After about an hour, I heard a faint squishing sound like wet feet on stone. My heart pounded in my chest. I got up slowly and moved toward the hallway. Staying quiet, the squishing sound moved away from me. Heading to that bedroom, I felt wet on my forehead and my hands shook. I reached for the light switch, flicked it on, and looked down. Wet footprints fresh right in front of me, they LED straight to that door. I followed them. My pulse hammered against my ears. I put my hand on the doorknob, hesitated, and then shoved the door open. There was no one inside. The footprints went right up to the wall and stopped. I walked over, bent down, and touched the last footprint. It was wet and cold. I stood up and pressed my ear to the wall again. Click, click, click. It was so soft I had to hold my breath to hear it. I felt dread crawl up my spine. I backed out of the room, closed the door, and locked it. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day I tried to distract myself. I drove into the nearby town, had lunch at a small cafe, and bought some groceries every so often. I'd remember those footprints and that clicking noise. My stomach would tighten and I'd feel short of breath. I tried to come up with explanations, but nothing made sense when I returned. The house felt colder than usual. The living room was at a decent temperature, but the hallway felt like a freezer. I turned up the space heaters and tried not to think about it. I asked a few more friends to visit to see if anyone else felt something. My friend Monica came by. One afternoon, she stepped into the hallway, stopped and frowned. She said the temperature shift felt strange, and she asked if I checked for leaks or insulation problems. I told her I had. We walked to the guest bedroom, and she stepped inside right away. She shivered and said her arms felt numb. She reached out and touched the wall. Then she looked at me with wide eyes and said it felt like ice. She moved back, left the room, and said she didn't want to stay any longer. She felt uneasy. I heard it in her voice. By this point, I had a routine. I woke up, checked for footprints, cleaned them if I found any, then tried to ignore the situation during the day, but at night, my nerves were raw. Even when I got home late from work, I'd walk in feeling like someone was watching me. I locked every door and window. I kept the fireplace going, but none of it stopped the footprints. One evening, I decided to inspect the wall more carefully. I took a small hammer and tapped along the stones. I expected it to sound solid. All the way across, most of it did. But near the center, I heard a slight hollow echo. I noticed one of the stones had a tiny gap where the mortar was worn. I tried to wiggle it, but it barely budged. I felt a chill hit me and I stopped. My gut told me not to mess with it. My head was full of questions. Could there be a hidden space behind the wall? Why did the footprint stop there? But I couldn't bring myself to remove the stones. I wasn't sure what I'd find. Plus, it wasn't my property. I only rented it. The lease didn't mention any hidden rooms or odd features. I went to bed that night with a racing mind. In the days that followed, the footprints showed up more often. Sometimes I'd hear the faint clicking behind the wall. In the daytime, I tried turning music on to drown it out, but the tension in my body never eased. I noticed myself jump at small noises like a cabinet door closing or a book dropping. My appetite shrank. I found it hard to concentrate on simple tasks. The house felt more alive than it should. Friends continued to comment on the cold spot whenever they visited, and everyone seemed uneasy. Walking down that hallway, some refused to step into the guest bedroom entirely. I started to feel paranoid. I considered staying at a hotel for a few nights just to clear my head, but I worried that if I left, something might happen while I was gone and I wouldn't see it firsthand. One night, I sat awake in the living room until about 2 in the morning, determined to see if anything new would happen. I had a flashlight, my phone camera ready, and no music playing around 1:30. I heard the clicking behind the wall start up again. It was distant at first, then it got a bit louder, though still faint. My heart hammered so hard I could feel the pulse in my neck. I stood up, forced myself to walk down the hallway and open the bedroom door. The footprints were already there, wet and glistening, forming one after another, leading me to the wall. It was like they appeared out of thin air. I lifted my phone to record, but my hand was shaking so badly that the footage looked jittery. I took a few steps forward, never taking my eyes off the footprints. The clicking continued slow and steady, then it stopped. Silence. I felt an urge to place my hand on that stone with the gap in the mortar. Maybe I wanted confirmation that there was something behind it. I leaned in and pressed my palm against the stone. It felt damp and cold. Then I thought I felt a slight vibration. I jerked my hand away and stumbled backward. My breath came in short bursts. My skin felt clammy and my heart raced. I spun around and left the room. That was enough. I locked the door again, even though it never seemed to help. Over the next few days, I avoided the guest bedroom entirely. I focused on work, tried to keep a normal routine, and stayed out of the house as much as possible. In the late evenings, I returned home, threw some logs in the fireplace, and huddled in the living room. I placed a piece of furniture in front of the guest bedroom door. It wasn't rational, but it made me feel slightly better at night. I still heard clicking noises, but more distant, like they had moved deeper inside the walls. I guess that should have comforted me, but it didn't. It was a constant reminder that something in this house defied explanation. At one point, I considered talking to the landlord about it, but I worried he'd shrug it off or think I was nuts. My friends didn't have any solid answers either. They just told me to be careful or to consider moving out. But my lease still had months to go, and the thought of packing up and leaving felt overwhelming now. Every time I walk into the hallway, my skin prickles. It doesn't matter if it's day or night. The cold is always there. I feel like the house is aware of me, watching how I react. There are moments when I think about that hollow-sounding spot in the wall. I wonder if there's an empty space behind there, or if there's something else at play, but I can't bring myself to pry it open. The strange footprints haven't stopped. I see them about twice a week, sometimes more. They always lead me to the same spot. They remind me that I'm never quite alone here. I don't have a neat explanation or a dramatic conclusion. I just know what I've heard and seen. The house has secrets and they show themselves in small ways, a chill in the air, footprints that appear and vanish, and that clicking noise on the other side of the wall. I'm stuck living with it for now, taking each day as it comes, and every night I brace myself waiting for the sound of wet footsteps to telling me once again that there's something behind that wall, something that won't let me forget. It's there. I moved into this newly renovated apartment complex because I wanted peace and a fresh start. I saw glossy floors, bright hallways, and a modern security system. I figured it would be smooth, but right now I'm sitting on my couch with every light turned on, wishing I had stayed in my old place. My name is Martin. I'm in my early 30s. I work a regular desk job in the city, and I usually get home around 7 in the evening. This building has only 4 floors, and my unit is on the 3rd. There aren't many residents. In fact, I only see a few people coming in and out. The elevator is always quick, and the hallways are almost always quiet. When I first moved here, I was excited about that. I thought it meant I'd get plenty of rest. I was wrong on my first night. I got home late. I had a stack of boxes still unopened, and I was exhausted around midnight. I heard something unusual. It sounded like soft footsteps in the hallway. I shrugged it, off guessing someone upstairs might be walking around, or maybe a neighbor was pacing. But then I noticed the footfalls seemed to stop right outside my door. I listened carefully. I didn't hear a knock. I didn't hear a voice. I felt a tiny rush of adrenaline because it seemed so deliberate, like someone stopped there on purpose. I got up from the couch and walked to my door. I pressed my eye against the peephole. Nothing. The corridor lights were on and everything looked empty. I turned the deadbolt and went back to the couch. I tried to forget about it the next morning. I left for work around 8. The hallway was quiet and clean. I saw no one. I noticed the polished walls, the new paint job, and the overhead lights. They were all bright and modern. I tried not to think about the previous night. I wrote it off as exhaustion or the building settling that night. I heard the footsteps again. It wasn't loud. It was more like a gentle tapping against the floor. It came slowly from the far side of the hallway past my door and then seemed to come back, stopping near my unit. I got up again, feeling uneasy. My arms felt tense, and I noticed sweat collecting on my forehead. I waited near the door for a few seconds, not sure if I should open it. Finally, I peeked through the peephole again. There was nobody there. I checked the time on my phone. It was almost 1 a.m. I turned around and leaned against the door, feeling a slight tremble in my legs. I tried to calm down. Over the next few days. I became more alert. I tried to catch whoever was in the hallway. Maybe it was a prank or a neighbor who had insomnia, but each time I checked, I found nothing. When I tried to bring it up with a neighbor in the elevator, an older man from the 2nd floor, he looked at me with confusion. He said he hadn't heard anything at night. I tried to chat with another neighbor, a woman who lives across the hall. She also said she never heard strange sounds. She seemed genuine, and she even looked a bit concerned for me. I thanked her and acted like it wasn't a big deal, but it stuck in my mind. Why was I the only one hearing this? One evening, I decided to walk the hallway myself. I left my apartment door open and stepped outside. The corridor was quiet. The air felt still. My footsteps echoed, but I heard nothing else. I walked from one end to the other. I checked the emergency staircase. It was empty. I checked the elevator area. It was clean and silent. The only sound was the faint buzz from the overhead lights. After a few minutes, I went back inside and locked my door. My thoughts were racing, but I tried to push them aside. A few nights later, I came home and found my door slightly open. I remember stopping in front of it, feeling my heart skip a beat. I always lock my door with the key. I never leave it open. I reached for the doorknob and pressed it gently. It moved without resistance and the door swung inward. My hallway light was off. I was sure I had turned it on before leaving in the morning because I hate coming back to a dark apartment. I stood there for a moment debating whether to call the front desk or go in. I eventually gathered my nerve and stepped inside. I flicked the light switch. Nothing happened. The bulb had burned out or it was disconnected. That was strange because the fixture was brand new. I felt a chill against my arms like a cold draft in the apartment. This unit usually stays warm, especially in the spring, so it caught me off guard. I walked into the living room and noticed that a window was open a crack. Even though I never open that particular window, it faces a side street and I usually keep it sealed to avoid traffic noise. I locked it and turned on the overhead light. This one worked. I scanned the room. My furniture looked untouched, but a couple of decorative items on a shelf seemed slightly out of place. My coffee mug was still on the kitchen counter where I left it. Nothing looked stolen still. I felt unsettled. My legs felt weak and my mouth was dry. I checked my bedroom. Everything was in order except the closet door was half open. I never leave it that way. I stood there staring at the closet. My pulse was loud in my ears. I stepped forward and opened the closet, fully expecting to see something or someone. It was empty, just my clothes and some boxes. I remember letting out a shaky breath. I closed the closet door and told myself I must have forgotten to lock the door that morning, but deep down I doubted that. Later, I replaced the bulb in the hallway, then I made myself some dinner. I tried to relax, but I kept replaying the moment I found the door ajar that night. I had trouble sleeping. My body felt tense, and every small noise in the building made me jump around 2 a.m. I heard a faint whispering sound. It was hard to pinpoint the direction, but it was low and distant. It sounded like 2 or 3 voices, almost like a conversation happening in another room. I got out of bed, pressed my ear to the wall, and listened. My neighbor's unit should be on the other side, but I never hear them at night. There was no sign of a TV or music. This was different. It lasted maybe a minute, then stopped. I stood there heart pounding. The next morning I decided to talk to the building manager. His office is on the ground floor in a small room near the lobby. I told him I was concerned about security and that I found my door open. He flipped through a logbook and said no one else had complained about break-ins or suspicious behavior. Then he showed me a screen with a few camera feeds. One camera faced the lobby entrance. Another faced the parking area. Another pointed at the elevator doors on each floor, but the hallways themselves weren't covered. He apologized, saying that the building was still installing more cameras. He advised me to double-check my locks and let him know if anything else happened. He seemed polite, but he also looked a bit annoyed, like he'd heard his share of weird complaints. I left feeling unsatisfied. I went to work and tried to focus, but I kept thinking about the building. Everything looked saint-of-the-art, but something about it felt off. The nights were the worst part, with those footsteps and that cold presence. I considered looking for a new place, but I'd already spent a lot of money moving in. I decided to give it more time. That evening, I arrived home around my usual time. I stood in front of my door, took a breath, and unlocked it. This time it was fully shut and the lights worked. I made dinner, watched a show on my laptop, and tried to unwind mind around 11 p.m. I turned off the living room lights and went to bed a few hours later. I stirred awake, feeling like something had woken me up. I lay still, listening. At first I heard nothing, then I caught a soft scraping sound near my front door. It reminded me of someone brushing against the metal or lightly scratching it. My stomach clenched. I slid out of bed, grabbed my phone, and tiptoed toward the living room. The sound continued for a few seconds, then stopped abruptly. I stood still, my bare feet on the cool floor. My heart beat fast. I stepped closer to the front door. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I wanted to fling it open and catch whoever was there, but I was also afraid. I pictured opening the door and finding nobody. Just the empty corridor again. I pressed my ear to the door. Total silence. Finally, I turned the deadbolt. I opened the door a few inches and peeked into the hallway. The overhead light was on it, illuminated the beige walls and the other doors. No one stood there. I stepped out, feeling a cool current of air on my skin. The hallway felt colder than usual. My breath caught in my throat. I looked left and right. Both ends were empty. I closed my door, locked it again, and stepped back inside. My hands were shaking. I had trouble sleeping for the rest of the night. A couple of days later, I decided to talk with another neighbor. I ran into a middle-aged guy who lives on the 4th floor. He wore a t-shirt and jeans. Looked a bit tired, but friendly enough. I asked him if he ever noticed anything strange at night, like noises in the hallway. He tilted his head, thinking for a moment, then said he mostly works nights and doesn't hear much. He asked if everything was all right. I felt a bit embarrassed, but I told him I was just being cautious. He said he'd keep an ear out and let me know if he noticed anything. He didn't seem to think much of it. I started checking my door obsessively. Every time I left or came back, I wiggled the doorknob, slid the chain lock, and even tried pulling on it to see if it gave way. It always felt solid, but that didn't stop the strange feelings at night. The whispers would come and go. Sometimes they sounded like they were in the living room. Other times they seemed to be in the corridor. Whenever I checked, I found nothing. One night I tried a different tactic. I sat quietly in my living room, lights off, phone in hand, hoping to record the sound around midnight. I heard the faint footsteps in the hallway. My heart started racing. I stood up carefully, not wanting to make noise. I walked toward the door. The footsteps stopped. I pressed record on my phone and placed it against the door. After a few seconds, I heard a soft shuffle, like someone moving. Slowly, I felt my chest tighten. I whispered to myself, "Who is out there?" But I kept my voice low. My phone picked up only my words and a bit of static. I decided to open the door a crack and hold my phone up to capture anything. I did that. But as soon as I opened the door, the hallway was still. I could feel my hands trembling. I stood there for maybe a minute. Phone extended. I didn't catch any new noise. I retreated back inside, locked the door, and checked the recording. It was mostly silence apart from my whisper and some faint shuffling. It wasn't clear enough to prove anything. The tension kept building. I felt run down during the day at work. I was jumpy at home. I was on edge. The building itself looked normal, but late at night I felt like I was in a different place. The air felt heavier. And the quiet seemed unnatural. Every footstep in the hallway felt amplified. Every time the elevator pinged, I felt a rush of anxiety. I sometimes wondered if I was imagining it all, but I couldn't ignore the footsteps. The open door and the strange cold spots in my apartment one evening about 2 weeks after I moved in. I came home and noticed the corridor lights flickering. That was new. The light outside my door would dim, then brighten again. There wasn't a sound. The rest of the floor seemed fine. I stepped inside and tried to shake off my nerves. I changed clothes, heated up some leftovers, and tried to watch an online video. Then I heard a light tapping on the wall next to my front door. It sounded like knuckles hitting the drywall. 3 soft taps. My eyes snapped in that direction. I paused the video and listened another 3 taps. I got up, walked to the door, and said in a loud voice, "Hello." My own voice startled me in the silence. The tapping stopped. I waited. When I didn't hear anything else, I opened the door quickly. The hallway was empty. No flickering this time. The air felt stuffy and cold. I took a step out, looked around. Nobody. I couldn't handle it anymore. I went back inside and locked everything, including the chain. That night I hardly slept. I kept imagining those footsteps returning or the door unlocking on its own around 3 in the morning. I jolted awake because I thought I heard a muffled conversation in my living room. My mind was racing. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand and walked out there. The living room was dark, the windows were closed, and there was no one inside. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I turned on the lights, checked every corner, and found nothing. I felt cold sweat all over my face. My arms trembled, and I had to lean on the wall to steady myself. I'm writing this while sitting at my kitchen-able table. Every light in the apartment turned on. I've thought about calling a friend to come over, but it's late and I'm not sure how to explain it. I don't want to sound paranoid tomorrow. I might look up other apartments even if I have to break my lease. I can't decide if it's just my imagination or if there's something wrong with this place. All I know is that every time I hear footsteps in that hallway, every time I feel that sudden cold rush, I get a knot in my stomach. I keep expecting something or someone to show up when I open the door, but I never see a thing. Maybe I'm losing sleep and making this worse in my head, or maybe this building's renovation didn't fix everything. Either way, I'm not comfortable here anymore. I want to believe it's just stress, but at night when I hear those sounds, I can't ignore the sense that there's something around just out of sight. It's enough to make me question my own sanity, and I'm not sure how much longer I can handle it. I never thought I would regret buying a peaceful weekend place in the countryside. I wanted to escape the stress of the city, relax in the fresh air, and feel safe for a few days. Every week, I chose a small house with a large yard and a surrounding tree line. It looked comfortable and quiet. It seemed like the perfect retreat. Then the night started to feel wrong. I closed on the property about a month ago. From the outside, the house looked ordinary. There was a wraparound porch, some neat flower beds, and a simple gravel driveway that led to the main road. The nearby forest looked old and thick. The trees were tall and their branches spread out in every direction. They blocked most of the sun in the late afternoon, casting dark shadows on the grass around the edges of my property. During my first weekend there, I was too busy unpacking boxes and organizing furniture to notice anything strange. I went to bed around 11 that night. The place felt different from my apartment in the city. It was much quieter. There were no traffic noises, no humming appliances, and no neighbors moving around next door. I heard only frogs or insects in the distance. I liked that at first. I remember feeling relieved around midnight. I woke up when a strange snap came from outside. It sounded like a tree branch. Breaking, I figured it was just a deer or maybe some other wildlife. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard more crunching sounds. My windows were closed, so the sounds were a bit muffled, but they had an odd rhythm. I told myself it was nothing. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep the next day. I woke up early, I ate a simple breakfast, then walked around the property. The grass was damp with morning dew. I checked the fence along the boundary and saw no damage. I walked closer to the tree line and noticed how thick the forest was. There were no clear paths. The canopy above was dense. The air there felt heavier and the ground was covered in rotting leaves. I saw some squirrels and birds, nothing more. After a while, I went back inside and decided to paint one of the spare bedrooms. Later that second night, I heard more snapping sounds from the forest. They were louder. Then before, I remember lying in bed holding my breath, trying to hear any sign of footsteps. All I caught were those quick snaps, then a long pause, then another snap. It sounded larger than a normal animal. It felt like something was taking slow, deliberate steps among the branches on the ground. I got out of bed, walked to the window, and lifted a corner of the curtain. I saw darkness. I waited, but there was no movement. I finally closed the curtain and went back to bed. Though I didn't sleep well, my heart was racing and my stomach felt uneasy. On the third day, I spent time cleaning the gutters and checking the exterior walls. Everything seemed in order. The house looked sturdy, the windows were intact, and there was no sign of forced entry. Later, I decided to explore more of the yard. I found several areas where the grass was pressed down as if someone had walked through. There were no clear footprints, just flattened grass. I assumed it was from local wildlife, maybe deer roaming during the night. My neck felt tense, though because the pressed down spots were in a wide arc around the house, I tried to brush it off. I had no proof of anything wrong. That same night I was reading on the couch when I heard something scrape against the outside wall. I shot up from my seat. I froze, listening carefully. The scraping sounded short and rough, like wood dragging on stone. I put my book down, grabbed my flashlight, and walked to the front door. I opened it slowly and aimed the flashlight around. The porch was empty. The yard looked still. The forest stood there, dark and silent. No wind, no movement. I tried to scan between the trees. The flashlight beam didn't catch anything except trunks and branches. I felt a chill on my arms. Despite the warm night, I told myself to calm down, then went back inside. I locked the door and double-checked all the windows. Later, I went to bed around 1 in the morning. I woke up to another. Sound outside. It wasn't a scrape this time. It was more like a faint knock near the window on the side of the house. I got out of bed and flicked on the lamp. My heart was pounding. I listened. There was another knock, then silence. I walked into the hallway and approached the side window. I peeked out carefully. The night was dark and I could barely see beyond the glass. The yard light on that side was weak. I turned on the outside light switch near the hallway. The bulb created a small pool of light on the ground, but I saw no one there. I stood still for several minutes waiting. I felt a chill in my gut, like I was being watched. Eventually, I went back to bed, but I didn't fall asleep until sunrise the next morning. I walked outside to that side window. The soil under the window was soft with some patches of old mulch. I saw two strange marks, almost like impressions from a pair of hands or something that pressed against the ground. The dirt looked pushed out of place, and the shape resembled the heel of a palm and part of a forearm. I crouched down and touched the edges. The soil was disturbed in a rounded pattern, like someone leaned forward on both arms. It made no sense. I felt uneasy. I looked around and noticed a few scuff marks on the siding. They were faint, but the paint was scratched. It almost looked like nails had dragged across the surface. Nothing else seemed damaged. So I took a photo of the marks on my phone and decided to keep track if anything else happened. I kept myself busy that day. I mowed the lawn, reorganized some shelves, and tried not to think about the odd marks when dusk approached. I felt that rising tension in my chest again. I locked the doors early. I checked each window latch. I pulled the curtains closed. I tried to watch TV and distract myself around 10 at night. I turned off the lights and walked into the bedroom. I kept a flashlight and a small crowbar by the bed. I felt silly, but I also felt more comfortable having something in reach. The night was quiet for a few hours. At around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a loud crack from the yard. It sounded like a heavy branch snapping. I sat up and grabbed my flashlight. I slipped out of bed still in my t-shirt and sweatpants. My heart was pounding and my forehead was damp with sweat. I walked to the living room and quietly opened the front door. The porch light was on, casting a pale glow on the steps. The rest of the yard was dark. The flashlight beam showed the grass and the edge of the forest. I saw no movement, but I heard a faint rustling among the leaves near the trees. There was no breeze. The rustling stopped and everything went silent again. I stood there for a long time, shining the flashlight back and forth across the tree line. My pulse was so loud in my ears that I barely heard anything else. Finally, I thought I noticed a shape between two thick trunks. It was just a vague silhouette. I couldn't see details, but it was taller than an average person. I stayed quiet, aiming the flashlight. The shape didn't move. I felt a tightening in my stomach. My hands trembled a little. I tried to steady the flashlight, but my beam only lit up the bark of the trees and some undergrowth. The shape appeared darker than everything else around it. Then I blinked and it seemed to shift a bit to one side. Out of the flashlight's path, I kept staring, but then it was gone. I didn't see it. Leave it just wasn't there anymore. I backed up into the house, locked the door, and went to the window to see if I could spot anything from inside. I stayed up the rest of that night sitting in a chair with the flashlight ready. Nothing else happened at dawn. I tried to make sense of it. I felt uneasy. I thought about calling the local sheriff, but I had no real evidence. Besides some marks in the dirt and what I thought I saw in the trees, I also felt hesitant to explain that I saw a silhouette. The local authorities might just think it was a trespass or some trick of the light that day. I tried to figure out a logical reason for everything. Maybe there was a large animal like a bear, though I had never heard about bears in that region. Maybe it was a tall drifter or a hunter. My mind kept flipping through explanations, but none seemed right. I walked out to the forest line and took a closer look at the spot where I thought I saw the figure. The ground there was covered in old leaves, twigs, and pine needles. I didn't see footprint prints, but I saw spots where leaves were crushed. I saw a few broken twigs. The branches overhead were thick and very little sunlight came through the area. Felt colder than the open yard. My hands felt clammy. I didn't linger there long. By the time evening came, I was tense again. I cooked a simple dinner and ate while standing by the kitchen window. I wanted to watch the yard. I felt like something could appear at any moment. My shoulders were stiff and I kept glancing at the clock. Time felt slow when darkness fell. I locked everything again. I checked the same side window with the strange marks. No new marks had appeared. That gave me some relief. I decided to stay up and keep watch. I sat in the living room with the TV muted. The curtains were open just enough for me to see the yard under the porch light. The clock ticked loudly. Hours went by. My eyes started to burn from staring around. 1 in the morning, I saw movement at the edge of the forest. I leaned forward in my chair. My pulse sped up. The shape returned. It was near the largest tree trunk, and I could see its outline because it blocked part of the faint light from the porch. I reached for my flashlight, but I stopped myself from flicking it on. I wanted to see if it would move closer or stay put. The shave stood still. It was upright, not crouched it. It seemed to watch the house. I felt a chill on my arms and back. My breathing went shallow. I waited for a few minutes. The shape didn't come forward, it just remained in that spot motionless. Finally, I decided to try the flashlight from inside. I aimed it through the window, but the glare on the glass made it hard to see. I got up heart pounding and crept to the front door. I opened at a crack, keeping the chain on. I pointed the flashlight toward the forest when I aimed at that spot. I didn't see it anymore. I felt a wave of fear. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I turned off all the inside lights and stood by the window, peeking out from the side of the curtain. The shape did not return to that spot, or if it did, I couldn't see it. I felt exhausted. My head ached from lack of sleep. My body was tense. I noticed how sweaty my palms were when I finally sat down again. My heart kept pounding for a long time. Eventually, I dozed off in the chair. I woke up around sunrise with a stiff neck. I got up and walked around the property in daylight, looking for more signs of disturbance. I found nothing new. No footprints, no scratches on the walls, no damage to the windows. It was all calm in the sunlight that afternoon. I called a friend. I told him I was dealing with something strange at the new place. I said it might be a trespasser. He offered to come by next weekend and check it out with me. I agreed because I felt desperate for backup. I stayed through the rest of the week and the nightly pattern continued. Almost every evening I heard some kind of branch snapping or a quick scrape on the exterior. Sometimes I saw a shape near the edge of the forest. I never saw details. It was always just a dark outline. Out of reach of my flashlight, whenever I tried to approach it was gone. Before I could focus one night, I built up the courage to walk outside with my lantern and stand by the porch railing. I called out asking if anyone was there. The night was still. My voice sounded too loud. I waited, holding the lantern up, scanning the darkness, then a twig snapped near the middle of the yard. I pointed the lantern in that direction, but there was no one there. I heard another crack near the forest. My chest felt tight. I retreated back into the house, locked the door, and shut off the porch light. I stood behind the door listening for any more sounds. After a while, it went silent by the time my friend was supposed to arrive. I was jumpy at every noise. He called me that morning to say he was running late. I decided to wait on the porch. The day was bright and the air felt warm. While I waited, I walked around the yard again, looking for evidence. When I circled behind the house, I noticed a few more scuff marks on the siding. These were near the back window. They seemed higher up than before. It looked like something had been pressing or scraping there as well. I felt that sense of dread. Again, I hurried back to the front porch and sat there scanning the trees until my friend arrived in his truck. He stayed with me for 2 nights. We heard the same cracks in the woods once around midnight. We both looked out the living room window and saw the shape at the edge of the forest. He shined a bright flashlight at it, but it disappeared behind the thick tree trunks. He suggested installing more lights and maybe a security camera system. We went to a local hardware store the next day and bought motion-activated lights. We set them up around the exterior of the house that night. The lights turned on a few times, but we only caught glimpses of something moving near the trees. My friend looked uneasy, but didn't say much. He left the next morning, advising me to stay alert now. Every time it gets dark, I feel that presence. Sometimes I hear the branches breaking. Sometimes the motion-activated lights flick on and I see a quick flash of something at the tree line. The nights are endless. My throat feels dry when I try to sleep. My arms tense whenever I hear the slightest sound. Outside, the marks on the walls haven't gotten worse, but I keep finding new scuffs near the windows. I don't know if it's a person or an animal, but it seems bigger than any ordinary intruder. It never tries to break in, though it comes close enough to the house to leave signs. I'm not sure what to do now. I bought this place for peace and quiet, and I found the opposite. The feeling of being watched hasn't gone away. It lingers in the back of my mind whenever I'm here. I don't know if this place will ever feel normal, and I'm not sure how long I can endure these nights. I woke up on my second night in the new house with a jolt. My phone charger sparked against the wall, and the lights above my head blinked twice before going dark. There was a faint crackling sound in the distance. I felt my pulse pounding in my neck. This wasn't just old wiring, something else was off. That was the moment I realized I had stepped into something I didn't fully understand. I had moved into this old two-story house a few weeks earlier. The place was in a historic neighborhood with a lot of preserved buildings. The paint on the outside was peeling. The windows were framed by weathered shutters, and the porch creaked. Whenever I lifted my weight, I liked its appearance because I thought it had potential. I planned to spend my weekends fixing the place up. I thought I'd handle some of the simpler repairs on my own. I'd watched a few online videos on house restoration, so I felt confident enough to tackle basic tasks. On my first day, I spent hours ripping up old carpet in the living room. The air smelled dusty and stale. The front door stuck. If I tried to close it too fast, the floorboard squeaked. Especially near the base of the stairs. The staircase itself had a leaning banister, which I made a note to fix upstairs. There were 3 bedrooms and a small storage space. I had decided to keep one bedroom as my own and use the other 2 as a home office and a guest room. The last bedroom at the end of the hallway felt colder than the others. I noticed it right away. The light switch in that room sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. I fiddled with it a few times. Sometimes it gave off a soft buzz. I assumed it was old wiring and planned to fix it eventually on my second night. Like I said, I woke to that flickering light in the morning. I phoned an electrician I found online. He showed up that afternoon with a worn toolbox and a serious look on his face. He walked around upstairs and tested everything with a small voltage tester. He climbed into the attic space. He even removed the faceplate of the switch in that back bedroom. He told me the wiring was old but intact. He said he didn't see any immediate reason for the switch to cut out the way I described. He told me to call him if it happened again, then left. I felt uncertain, but I tried not to overthink it. That night, the wind rattled the shutters outside my bedroom window. I'd been exhausted from moving furniture all day, so I fell asleep quickly. Sometime around midnight, I heard a slow, deliberate creaking noise that sounded like a door hinge. It wasn't the front door. It felt closer, like it was coming from upstairs. I sat up and stared around in the dark. My door was closed, the hallway, light was off. I listened for a minute, my heart thawing in my chest, but I didn't hear it again. I thought it might have been the house settling old places. Do that, I told myself the next morning. I went upstairs and checked all the doors. My own bedroom door was fine, my home office door was fine. The door to that last bedroom was slightly open. But I was pretty sure I had closed it. I stepped inside and flipped the switch. The overhead light flickered, then stayed on. The air felt stuffy, so I opened a window. I thought I smelled something that reminded me of old cologne or some kind of strong perfume. It wasn't pleasant. It had a stale edge like it had been lingering for years. I figured maybe there was something stored in the closet, so I checked it was empty. I shrugged and went about my day, sanding a few rough spots on the staircase banister. Later, I realized that the smell had followed me out into the hallway. I sniffed my shirt, thinking maybe it stuck to me. I wasn't sure. After I ate dinner, I went upstairs again to see if the smell was still there. It was faint, but definitely in that bedroom. I turned off the light and closed the door. I didn't lock it yet, but I felt odd leaving it open that night. I lay in bed with my eyes on the ceiling. I kept waiting for that creaking sound. It came around 1 in the morning. It was the same slow squeak of a door hinge. I got out of bed fast. My bare feet felt cold on the hardwood floor. I flipped on the hallway light and hurried toward that last room. The door was closed, but now it was unlocked. My pulse sped up. I felt a jolt in my stomach. I stood there with my ear to the door, listening. Silence. I wrapped my hand around the knob and turned it. The room was dark, but a little moonlight came through the window. Everything looked the same, no furniture, no boxes, nothing out of place, but the smell was back stronger than before. I couldn't place it exactly, but it reminded me of old grooming products or a musk that had been left in a closet too long. The hair on my arm stood up. I just closed the door again in the morning. I decided to keep that door locked. I didn't have any real reason beyond my own nerves, but I had a key for each interior door in the house. I inserted the small key into the lock and turned it until I heard a click. I tested it a few times. It was solid. Then I went on with my day. I replaced a few light fixtures in the hallway, hoping new wiring might help. I made sure the circuit breaker in the basement was intact. Everything looked fine. I told myself I was being paranoid that night. I walked up the stairs, slowly testing each step for squeaks. I had my phone flashlight on when I reached that bedroom door. I checked the lock. It was still engaged. I exhaled and felt a bit better. My own bedroom was a mess of half-unpacked boxes, so I worked on it for a while, folding clothes and organizing things around midnight. I finally lay down. My legs were tired. My eyes felt heavy. I tried to focus on the hum of the old fan in the corner. I must have dozed off because I woke again to a soft squeaking sound. I froze. It sounded exactly like that same door, but it was sharper this time, like the hinges had moved under pressure. I sat up, swung my legs off the bed, and grabbed my phone. The hallway was dark again. I felt a wave of apprehension push through me. My breathing went shallow and my chest felt tight. I made my way to that door. It was closed, but I reached for the knob. It turned easily in my hand. The lock was disengaged. I opened the door. Shining my phone's flashlight into the room, it was empty. I flicked the switch. The overhead light came on with a weak glow, then cut out. I stood there in the dark. My heart pounded. I called the electrician again the next day. This time, he brought a colleague. They went through the wiring once more, checked the breaker box, replaced the light switch in that room, and tested the circuits. Everything worked when they left. They told me I might be overloading the breaker with all my equipment, but I wasn't running much at night. I tried to explain the squeaking door, but they shrugged. One of them suggested maybe the latch was loose. I replaced the latch myself that afternoon. I also added new WD-40 to the hinges, hoping that would fix the noise. I locked the door again when I finished for a while. Nothing happened. I started to relax during the day. I focused on repainting some of the walls. I tested different shades of off-white. I replaced an old light fixture in the kitchen. I fixed the front door so it wouldn't stick by the fourth day. I felt confident that the weird noises might have stopped. I was alone in the house, but I felt fine. Then on the fifth night, I woke again. The power was out. In that same part of the upstairs, my bedside lamp still worked, but the hallway was dark. I got up, walked to the breaker box in the basement, and saw that everything was normal. No tripped switch. I felt sweat on my forehead. Even though the basement was cool, I went back upstairs with a sense of dread. When I reached that hallway, I noticed a faint smell. It was that old perfume motor drifting through the air. It made my stomach tighten. I walked up to the door, tested the knob it was. Unlocked. I stepped back and took a deep breath. The locked door was unlocked again, and I had no explanation for it. I turned the knob slowly, my hand shaking. The door creaked when I pushed it inward. The window was open about a foot. Letting in a breeze, I knew I had closed it earlier. My arms felt tense. I hurried over to the window, slammed it shut, and locked it. I left the room quickly. I decided to sleep on the couch downstairs that night. I turned on every light in the living room, but around 2 in the morning, I heard the faint squeak again. It came from above me. I sat up, heart racing, and stared at the ceiling. I could almost imagine the door opening and closing. Then it went quiet. I didn't sleep again the next morning. I bought a digital camera and set it up facing that door from the hallway. I hit record before bedtime. I wanted some kind of proof that night. I heard the door squeak around 3 in the morning. I felt a surge of adrenaline in my arms and legs. I stayed in my bedroom listening. My chest felt tight. I waited when morning came. I rushed out to check the camera. The video was there at around 3:05 a.m. and the door opened a few inches, stayed that way for a few seconds, then closed again. No one was visible in the shot. I couldn't see a hand or any movement in the gap. The door just opened and closed. My stomach lurched when I watched it. I felt a flush of heat in my face. I locked that door again, pacing back and forth in the hallway, trying to calm down. At that point, I started feeling like an intruder in my own house. My thoughts were rapid. I wondered if someone had a spare key or if there was a hidden passage. I checked the closet, the walls, the attic space. Nothing, no sign of a hidden door or anything else. I decided to barricade that room. I pushed a heavy dresser from the hallway into the doorway. I left it there so no one could get in or out that night. I was so tense I could barely sit still. I kept looking at the stairs from my living room couch, waiting for a sound at around midnight. The power in the hallway died again. My palm started sweating. Then I heard a soft scraping sound against wood. It was a gentle push, like someone trying to open the door, but finding the dresser blocking the way I stood at the base of the stairs, my teeth clenched. The sound stopped after a few seconds. I didn't sleep at all in the morning. I found the dresser had moved about an inch. I had marked its position on the floor with a piece of tape. Just to be sure, I felt a pounding in my head. I didn't want to believe it was possible, but I was out of rational explanations. I put the dresser back in its place, taped the floor again, and left for work all day. I couldn't focus on anything else. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I came home that evening and went straight upstairs. I decided to open the room and just leave it unlocked. I removed the dresser, opened the door wide, and propped it against the wall. The room looked the same as always, empty. The overhead light was off. The smell was faint, but still. There, the window was closed. The air inside felt a few degrees colder than the rest of the house. I said out loud, "I don't want any trouble, I just want to live here." My voice felt shaky in my throat that night. I tried to sleep in my own bed around 1 a.m. I heard footsteps overhead, like the sound of shoes on the creaky floorboards. I bolted upright, heart pounding. The footsteps moved from one side of the room to the other, then stopped. I swallowed hard the next morning. I found the door half open again. Now there was a faint smell in the hallway too, like someone had walked around during the night. I decided that I'd keep the door closed but not locked. I hoped whoever or whatever was there would stop messing with the electricity if I didn't challenge them. It's been a few nights of that arrangement. The power in the room still cuts out sometimes, and the hallway light flickers on occasion. I still wake up to a door squeak from time to time. I climb the stairs, my heart pounding with every step when I reach the top. The door is usually closed, but not always. Sometimes it's open a crack. Sometimes it's locked from the inside, though I never locked it. I still catch a hint of that perfume. It's not every night, but it happens enough to unnerve me. I keep the key in my pocket just in case I haven't seen anyone inside that room. I've checked it a dozen times. I've moved around the furniture. I've examined the walls and the closet. I can't find anything that explains it. I still live here hoping that this will either stop or I'll get used to it. I don't feel threatened exactly, but I do feel like I'm not alone. Sometimes I stand in the hallway and stare at the door, my breath shallow. I can sense a presence, although I can't see it. It's like someone is making sure that room stays private. That's the best way I can put it. Even though I own this place now, it feels like there's a line I shouldn't cross. I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. Everything looks normal by daylight, and there are no obvious signs of forced entry or damage. The electrician can't find any problem. Nobody has a logical explanation for the door squeaking open on its own. I double-check the lock each night, but it doesn't matter. The door does what it wants, and every time it happens, I sense a quiet message. Stay out. I've learned to live with it for now. I still hear the squeak from time to time, usually late at night. I pause whatever I'm doing and I wait for it to stop. Sometimes the smell lingers for a while, sometimes the power in that room blinks out for no reason. It's not a daily occurrence, but it's often enough that I can't ignore it. I still keep the door shut, but I don't try to block it anymore. I figure it's not worth the stress. If something wants its space, I'll give it. That's my story. I moved into an old house in a historic neighborhood thinking I'd enjoy the atmosphere and the renovation projects. Instead, I'm sharing the place with something I can't explain. There's no sign of it harming me. There's just the squeaking door, the locked knob that unlocks itself, the flickering light in that back bedroom, and the lingering perfume that drifts through the halls late at night. That's the reality I'm living in now. I don't see L to know why it's happening, and I've stopped trying to reason with it. I just hope it doesn't get worse. For now, I'm keeping my distance and doing my best to ignore the things I can't change. I guess that's all I can do. I moved into the studio 2 weeks ago because it was close to my office. The rent wasn't cheap, but the location felt perfect. I could walk to work in under 10 minutes. That convenience seemed worth the cramped space. Right from the start, everything felt off. It started with small things like my coffee mug not being where I left it. I brushed it off as me being distracted. Then I noticed my nightstand was a few inches away from the wall. One morning I pushed it back and forgot about it. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. I'm not the superstitious type, and I sure as hell don't jump to ghost stories. The layout of the studio is simple. There's a door leading into a narrow hallway that opens into the main area. A small bed is tucked in one corner next to a table and a chair. The kitchenette sits on the opposite side with a mini fridge and a single electric burner. There's a tiny bathroom in the back. I can see the whole place from my bed. If I angle myself right, it's not roomy, but I only needed to eat, sleep, and shower most of my day. I'm out working or grabbing a bite somewhere nearby. The first real sign that something weird was going on happened on a Wednesday. I had gone to bed around 11. I remember placing my keys on the table next to a pile of papers. When I woke up, I saw the keys lying on the floor near my shoes, and the papers were stacked in a neat pile on the chair that didn't make sense. I knew I hadn't moved them at first. I thought maybe I'd gotten up in the night to go to the bathroom and knock them over, but that wouldn't explain the perfectly stacked papers. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling in my stomach, but it lingered the next day. The tension got worse. I tried an experiment. I took a few random objects, my phone charger, a pencil, and a folded grocery receipt, and lined them up along the table's edge. I took a mental snapshot of their positions, then I went to bed. I woke up with a start at around 4 in the morning. My heart was pounding and I didn't know why. Maybe I heard something. Maybe I just had a bad dream. I reached for my phone to check the time. The table lamp was still on, just like I'd left it. Everything was quiet. I forced myself to relax, telling myself it was just nerves. When morning came, I looked at the table. The charger was on top of the folded receipt and the pencil was rolled next to it. I felt a chill run through my body. I hadn't touched any of those things after I lined them up. I wasn't sleepwalking. I'd never had a history of that. But something was moving my stuff and it wasn't me. My palms got sweaty and my stomach tightened. I stood there staring at those objects, feeling a strange mix of anger and fear. If someone was sneaking in, how the hell did they do it without waking me up? I checked the front door. It was locked just the way I'd left it. The windows were shut. There was no fire escape or any obvious way someone could slip in. I walked over to the caretaker's small office in the lobby. He's a tall guy with graying hair and a blank expression. I asked him if anyone else had a key to my studio. He shrugged and said something vague about old locks. I pressed him more, but he didn't give me a straight answer. Instead, he mentioned that a few people moved out of that same studio pretty quickly in the past. He didn't say why, just said they left and didn't explain much. He acted like it was no big deal, but his evasive tone told me there was more to the story. I started feeling uneasy anytime I was in the studio during the day. I left early and came back late, trying to be in there as little as possible, but I couldn't avoid sleep each night. I double-locked the door and kept the lamp on. The bright light felt comforting at first, but it never fully calmed my nerves. I would lie in bed, eyes flickering around the room, looking for any slight movement or shadow. The nights passed in a blur of half-sleep and sudden jerky. Works awake, I often woke up with my heart racing, and sometimes I thought I heard faint rustling every single time. The objects I set out before sleeping were shifted around by morning. One morning, I found my chair turned to face the bed. That freaked me out. More than the smaller stuff, it felt like someone or something had positioned it for a clear view of me sleeping. My skin felt clammy. My arms tingled. My thoughts raced with possibilities. I looked for cameras or any sign of tampering. I saw no hidden devices, no loose ceiling tiles, nothing that made sense. The caretaker stayed tight-lipped when I asked him about break-ins. He just said to call the cops. If I felt unsafe, I considered it, but I had no solid evidence. Beyond some moved objects, I didn't want to sound crazy, calling the police to say that my furniture was out of place. I decided to stay awake one night to see if I could catch whoever was messing with me. I brewed a pot of strong coffee. I propped myself up in bed with my laptop, watching a movie on low volume with my eyes darting around the room. My plan was to stay alert until sunrise by 2 in the morning. My eyelids felt heavy by 3. I was struggling to keep my head up. I must have dozed off when I opened my eyes. It was bright outside, and I had an instant feeling of failure. My neck ached and my mouth felt dry. I looked at the table and saw the coffee mug was on the floor upright, a foot away from where ID placed it. No coffee had spilled, which meant it was lifted and placed there. My stomach lurched. I felt weak, almost dizzy, like my blood pressure dropped. I pressed my palms against my eyes and took deep breaths. Then I stood up and checked the door again, still locked. Windows still shut the next day at work. I could barely focus. People asked if I was feeling sick because I looked pale. My friend Jim asked if I was stressed out about something. I just shrugged and said I was having some trouble sleeping. I didn't want to sound nuts. I didn't want to explain that my furniture was moving on its own. I was scared people would think I'd lost it. Still, I felt a growing desperation. The caretaker knew something, but he refused to say. Instead, he acted like it was normal or that I should mind my own business that night. I tried another tactic. I took small pieces of tape and placed them on the door and window. If someone opened either one, the tape would tear. I also put some tape in spots around the floor near the table to see if footprints would show. Then I set up my phone to record a video while I slept. It was simple. I propped it on a shelf facing most of the room. The phone had enough battery to record a few hours, but not the whole night. Still, I figured it was better than nothing. I sat on the bed, the lamp on, feeling a surge of anxiety. My chest felt tight. I forced myself to lie down and try to relax. It took a while, but I drifted off. At some point, I woke up at dawn, heart pounding. The phone had fallen over. It was lying face down on the floor, still recording. I checked the door. The tape was intact. The window tape was intact, too. The pieces of tape on the floor were untouched, but the table was moved about 6 inches closer to the bed. My throat went dry. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I grabbed the phone and stopped the recording when I played it back. The video showed the room in stillness. For a long while, nothing seemed to happen. At some point, around 2 hours, in the footage. Cut to darkness, it was like the camera got blocked or the phone was moved. When the picture came back, it was just the phone's camera facing the floor. I saw nothing else. No figures, no signs of movement in the background. It was just a giant question mark. Now I was sure something was inside the studio with me, but I had no proof. I didn't know if it was a person using some weird trick or if it was something else I couldn't explain. My nerves were shot, my body felt constantly tense, and my hands were shaky. I didn't sleep well, and when I did, I had nightmares of shadows passing over me. I started jumping at every little sound. Sometimes the pipes in the walls made a faint knocking sound, and I'd jerk awake sweating. Convinced that someone was in the room after a week of this, I confronted the caretaker again. I told him I deserved to know what was going on. He shrugged, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "People leave that studio because they can't handle it." Then he turned around and walked into the back room of his office. I followed him, demanding answers. He told me there were rumors of a former premier tenant who used to come and go without paying rent. But I could tell he was lying or leaving something out. He refused to say more and even threatened to call security if I didn't let it go. I left furious and shaking my fists clenched at my sides. That same afternoon, I had a moment of panic while looking for a new place. Everything in the city was expensive, or too far from my job. I was stuck. I didn't have the budget to break my lease and run off somewhere else. Also, part of me refused to be driven out by something that refused to show itself. I told myself I'd push through, maybe find a way to solve it. I decided to spend more time in the studio during the day, thinking maybe I'd see something unusual in daylight. I sat on my bed with the TV off, listening for any subtle movement. Hours passed, traffic sounds came through the window. Sometimes I heard neighbors walking in the hallway. I watched dust mows in the sunlight. My eyes got heavy. Nothing unusual happened. It was always the nights that brought chaos when the sun went down. I felt the tension build again. My muscles got stiff. My eyes darted around the room. I felt cold spots near the table and sometimes near the bathroom door. A faint draft maybe, but it gave me goosebumps. One night I tried putting a chair against the door. I figured if someone tried to get in, they'd have to knock it over. I also placed a few empty cans next to the windowsill, hoping it'd rattle. If someone pushed it open around midnight, I heard a scraping sound. I jumped out of bed, my heart hammering in my chest. The cans were still in place, the door was still blocked, but the table lamp was now on the floor, upright, shining at an odd angle across the room. I hadn't heard it move. I hadn't seen anything. I could feel my pulse throbbing in my neck. I stood there scanning every corner. There was no one there. I picked up the lamp and put it back on the table, half expecting it to slide away from me. It stayed put. My breathing was short and shallow. I moved around the studio, flipping over pillows, checking cabinets. Nothing. My body felt shaky and weak, my vision blurred with stress. I wanted to scream or break something. Instead, I just stood in the middle of the room, too afraid to turn off the light, too tired to make sense of anything. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I marched down to the caretaker and told him I wanted out of my lease. He gave me a flat, uninterested look and said I'd need to pay 2 months' rent as a penalty, plus forfeit my deposit. That was too much for me. I couldn't afford it. I felt trapped at work. I tried not to snap at people. My coworkers noticed my mood. My boss asked if everything was okay. I said I was fine. I didn't want to admit how terrified I was of my own apartment at that point. Every night was the same routine. I locked the door, turned on the lamp, set my objects in a certain arrangement, and crawled into bed. My body would tense up, anticipating something. My mind would race. I'd listen for clicks or squeaks. Eventually, I'd pass out from exhaustion every morning. I'd find something, moved a chair slightly, or rotated a mug on the couch, a stack of papers neatly arranged in a corner. I don't know how it keeps happening, and I don't know who or what is doing it all. I know is that I'm stuck here at least until I can save enough to move. The caretaker won't help me, and the other tenants don't seem to want to talk about it. I've tried everything I can think of, from staying up all night to setting traps. None of it works. I'm still alone here with whatever is sharing the studio. I'm exhausted and on edge. I sleep with the lights on. But it doesn't make a difference. The studio feels wrong, like it doesn't belong to me every morning. I wake up, I check for changes. I don't even get surprised anymore. My hands shake a little and I force myself to pick up whatever's out of place and put it back. I can't see a logical explanation for any of this, and I'm too afraid to talk about it in detail with anyone, so I just keep living here, going through the motions. Work home, lock the door, wake up, find something moved. It's a nightmare that refuses to end, and that's where I stand now. Stuck, tired, waiting. I tell myself I'll find a way out, but I don't know when. For the time being, I'm just here surrounded by furniture that never stays in the same spot. Every day is another reminder that I'm not alone in this room, and I have no idea how to stop it.